Hello and welcome to the Hack the Planet podcast, the only podcast that knows which month was really the shortest. We are joined in the studio today by a special guest, Vitek, who's here to talk to us about developing custom NES ROMs, polyglots, and all kinds of assorted other related projects. We're also joined virtually by Mitchell. Say hello.
How's it going?
Once again, Virus.
Hello.
Dan.
How's it going?
Max.
Hello.
And that's it.
And Ben.
And Ben. Oh, that's right. And I'm Ben. So I have so many questions I want to ask. Vi, you want to say hello?
Hello.
Hey. So, just going through your list of projects, it's hard to know where to get started. So, you've been doing so many specialized projects with original Nintendo NES ROMs. Do you call it a Famicom or?
I mean, if it's for the Famicom, then yes. Otherwise, it's the NES.
Oh, geez, what's the difference?
One's Japanese cartridges with 60 pins, and then the other 72 pins for the NES.
Oh, I had no idea. I always saw that as like an emulator type, you know. I didn't realize there was actually a difference in the cartridge. So we just watched your Hope Talk from a couple years back, and the one thing I learned from there also that I never knew before is that there was a clone of the original Nintendo that was popular in Russia.
Actually, a clone of the Famicom in particular. So I don't remember which country made it. But they sold in Russia because, well, at that time, the Soviet Union, because they had, as far as I can tell, bans essentially on Western sort of devices, sales related things. So the counterfeit market kind of was able to, well, the cheap knockoff in particular market was able to take a hold there. And in this case, the Dendy, it was called, was a Famiclone that used essentially the same CPU speed as the Famicom in order to make games compatible if they did frame counting, but used 50 hertz rather than 60 hertz for its video processor.
Wow. Yeah, that's like I was a little kid in the United States, so I had a very narrow kind of view of the Nintendo at the time, and it's really interesting to find out sort of like what was going on in the Soviet Union with like little kid stuff in the same time period. So just a short list of some of your projects. So the one you're working on right now, you've got a Santa tracker you're developing as a NES ROM. You did the Game of Life. You did a brainfuck interpreter. And that's just sort of like scratching the surface. So I would like to get into kind of more detail on your projects a little bit later. I am really interested in your workflow. So I noticed that you make use of the game Genie and emulators, but you're also developing things and making actual cartridges.
Mm-hmm.
So what are, so I can kind of get my head around, how you might work with an emulator, like write some assembly, make a ROM image, load it in an emulator. I'm a little less familiar with what you're doing to make the actual cartridges, so I wanted to make sure I asked about that.
I actually find these things as a visual aid. Well, at least for myself. So when it comes to the NES, there are two separate chips, essentially, at least addressed onto the pins, one for graphics and one for programming. The NES and the SNES both have differences in that, same with the Game Boy. The Game Boy basically has the graphical data in the program data, and then it would copy things over to video RAM, where the NES has essentially a completely dedicated chip to that data. So in most cases, I would have the program data programmed onto like a 32 kilobyte EEPROM, and then same thing with the graphical data, which I still use 32 kilobyte ROMs, EEPROMs, even though it only really needs 8 kilobytes of that. I just use like a mini pro programmer.
Oh yeah. So you just use a straight EEPROM programmer and write it to an actual EEPROM, and then are you using like cartridges, like old Mario cartridges, or do you get
No.
blank?
The boards I tend to have used so far, it depends if I want to use flash ROM, which is easier for me to program, but at the same time slightly more expensive to accrue. But if I'm using one that has EEPROMs on it, I just get boards from seconddimension.com.
Seconddimension.com?
Second-dimension.com. Yeah.
And they have blank. Not a sponsor of the podcast, but
not a sponsor of the podcast.
If you want to send us some cartridges, we wouldn't say no. Do they have totally just unprogrammed blank NES cartridges?
So the ones for the EEPROMs just are like plain boring PCBs, unpopulated PCBs. So you'd stick the EEPROMs in, and it looks basically the same as like Super Mario Bros. Would if you take the cartridge apart. In fact, is basically like circuitry-wise exactly the same. There's also like a lockout chip, so a region lockout chip for the NES. The Famicom didn't include a region lockout like key lock system, but the NES did in order to... I don't know entirely if it was to prevent people from using NES games of other regions. I'm thinking it was because the Atari 2600 had so many developers making basically shovelware towards the end of its life before the video game crash, and Nintendo wanted to prevent that. So if you have to get a chip from Nintendo, it's a lot harder to make games.
Nintendo and Sega both had the seal of approval or whatever on all the cartridges, I remember back then.
Yeah, because Nintendo wouldn't let you make... they didn't want pirate games that were too violent. That's one of their big things.
And I think for a while it was the NES... during the NES era, Nintendo would allow developers to make, I believe, like between 3 and 5 games a year. That is it. So Konami could do 3 to 5 games a year all together. So they would make little subsidiaries that would basically be a different company name so they could make more. Atari did not like that, which is why you get a lot of those Tengen cartridges, like Tengen Pac-Man and stuff like that, where the cartridge is like this weird shell and stuff. And they made, I believe, the Rabbit chip, which I don't remember if that one that they used did electrical bypassing of the lockout mechanism, or if that was the one where they asked the U.S. Patent Office for the patent that just told them how to make it, and then they copied it.
Well, and then even by the kind of the mid to late 80s, like even the first one I saw was probably 87 or 88, like pretty early on, we had, my friend's dad was a pilot or whatever, and he'd come back from Japan with those like 50-in-1 cartridges, where it would have like 50 different games on one cartridge, and it would start up to a menu, and then you'd pick what game you wanted to play.
Super Mario Bros. 7 and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. And so I guess this kind of, that implies that inside that there was some kind of bootloader menu, and then that maybe they had like a chip with a lot more storage, and they would somehow just sort of,
bank switch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know how most of those work, but yeah, it probably works in a very similar way to that. And at that time, storage during that time wasn't necessarily cheap, but you could have the high end of cheap and then just stick a bunch of ROMs in there and then just tell it to point to a certain thing if you choose a certain game.
So you said that the graphics chip only used 8K.
Yep, as long as you're not doing like bank switching or anything, it's 8 kilobytes. 4
So-
kilobytes for the background tiles, 4 kilobytes for the sprites, although the sprites have some weird quirks to them.
So that's completely bizarre to me. So yeah, a game like Mario Brothers 3 only
That
was
has
used.
a lot more storage for the graphics. Only 8 kilobytes was available at a time, but you could switch, like, I think it's eighths of a like tile map, and there's 2 tile maps per 8 kilobytes.
Okay, so they could only use 8K at a time, but they could switch banks.
Yes.
And so, was there any limit in the actual Nintendo console as to how big that EEPROM was?
So as long as you have some sort of like memory mapper or memory management sort of thing, on the cartridge, you could basically do whatever the heck you want on the cartridge, as long as you can provide enough power to it to do calculations or whatever that it needs to do. And then essentially on the NES side, the part that the console to the cartridge has 32 kilobytes of program data addressable and 8 kilobytes of graphical data addressable. And it doesn't matter how the cartridge decides if it gets a request for a read to an address. It doesn't matter how the cartridge handles it, but it still only has 32 kilobytes of addressable space for the program and 8 kilobytes of addressable space for the graphics.
So just to go down a random tangent, so were there cartridges that did some sort of bank switching so they could effectively use a lot more program or graphics space?
Yes, and I'm almost certain there are probably, so there's, technically speaking, like the extreme end of this would be, there's a slideshow done by Tom Seven, who's also known as Sucker Punch on YouTube, who ended up taking an NES cartridge, sticking a Raspberry Pi inside of it, and turning it into a reverse emulator. So he was able to display video onto the NES and then take in button inputs from an NES controller, convert those to Super Nintendo controllers, button inputs, and then play Super Mario World on the NES, although with fewer buttons. And that's like the extreme side of that, where as long as it is giving the correct data through the pins, it doesn't matter what's happening on the cartridge side.
Does the NES also have the controller mapped directly to the cartridge as well? Because I know that's something that the Sega Genesis does.
So the controller is through a register, which I don't remember exactly what they call it, but it is Hex 4016 for the controller 1, and then 4017 for controller 2.
Okay, so it's only accessible through the memory or the address mapping in the CPU. Okay.
So the remind me, what was the microcontroller? It was the M.
So it's the Reiko 2A03, I believe, for NTSC. I don't remember the exact numbering and stuff for PAL, but it's 6502 based.
Okay.
Was that a Motorola?
That one was MOS technology.
Oh, right. So when you're writing custom cartridges, you're just writing straight 6502
assembly. Yep.
Oh boy.
Are there any frameworks built for it? I know Genesis has like sort of a SDK at this point that's been built up, and I'm sure they had one maybe back in the day. Maybe not, actually.
They probably didn't really back in the day. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't back in the day. There is NES Maker, which I assume is like C or C++ based stuff. I have seen people make NES games in C and C++, although a lot of it tends to be basically writing specific instruction bytes, which at which point is just assembly but longer.
Assembly with extra steps, yeah.
It is annoying with the 6502 though, with trying to make specific games. There is no native divide or multiply instruction.
Oh.
So you have to remember the fundamental theory of division or whatever from that math class you never took. It's like how do you do division with no division?
And multiplying using essentially the fundamentals of what multiplication is, there is an inherent difference between 5 times 50 and 50 times 5 CPU cycle count-wise.
Wow, yeah.
That seems totally reasonable. So,
do you end up having to do, do you end up doing ladder multiplication at that point? I think that's what you do in elliptic curve cryptography in order to sort of build up the
Trying to get elliptic curve cryptography to work on the NES sounds terrifying to me, and I am willing to maybe do lookup tables.
That's not what I meant at all. That is terrifying, truly terrifying.
You'd have to implement that scalar multiply function.
Yeah, no, but the scalar multiply uses a series of adds and doubles in order to do it in a maximum of whatever the bit size operations are.
It tends to work until you start dealing with prime numbers and multiple bytes and such. Then it starts getting confusing enough for the logic where it's just easier to say set some counter to the second number and then add the first number until the counter runs out.
So do you ever actually divide in any of your programs, or are you just you can divide by 2 or not divide at all?
I do have division in some of my games, but I don't remember which anymore.
Fair enough. So you just use some random editor, write straight assembler, and then you test things out in the emulator before you put them on a real cart?
Yep, just use Vim to write it. I use a program called ASM6. Well, the assembler is ASM6, which I assembled down to 6502 machine code, or I guess specifically NES machine code.
Is it different? Is the NES machine code different than regular 6502?
There are a few illegal instructions on the NES that work on the NES technically, and then decimal mode for numbers, so binary coded decimal, has a specific flag set for 6502, but apparently to save cost or to prevent some sort of trademark issue or something, that transistor circuitry is not included on the NES. So if you want to do binary coded decimal for scores and stuff, you manually have to underflow and overflow and stuff to get 0 minus 1 to equal 9 and all sorts of stuff.
Is that how you end up with the negative zone in the original Mario game?
Kind of. Yeah, a lot of that tends to be programmers back in the day did not expect people to attempt to figure out how to overflow, to go over a cap or under an underpinning. And they wouldn't have had to assume anyone could. The sense tracker thing you'd mentioned earlier, is basically held together with duct tape and twine string, maybe some bubble gum. If people really felt like trying to mess anything up and they could manage to flip some bit somewhere, the game's going to break, and the game's going to break hard. But yeah, Super Mario Bros. Is the same way.
Yeah. Well, there is a whole kind of subculture that lives on YouTube of people that try to glitch out classic games by studying the disassembly, seeing where these checks are missing, and then figuring out sequences they can do in the game to trigger it. I've spent an embarrassing amount of time watching those playthroughs.
There was, if anyone who's listening is familiar with TaskBot at all, there are a few individuals in the TaskBot community who are really good at finding arbitrary code executions in specific games, especially on the NES if it uses DPCM audio, because DPCM audio uses register 4017, which I had mentioned before is controller 2. So there's now an overlap. There's a conflict that's happening. And if let's see if I can get this exactly right. I might be slightly off, so don't take this as gospel, but if you are playing a DPCM audio sample on the same within a certain amount of CPU cycles, possibly same frame, collecting controller input, it might drop a bit of the controller input. So that's a hardware bug. And Nintendo knew about this hardware bug for like Super Mario Bros. 2 and Super Mario Bros. 3 because they both use DPCM audio, mainly for like the steel drum sort of sounds in the soundtrack. And in that particular case, they will ask the controller for input. They will then ask the controller for input a second time. If they match, they know it's a good controller input. If it doesn't, they throw the first result away, stick the second result in the first result, then ask the controller for input again. And then rinse and repeat until it gets 2 in a row. It should never take them more than throwing away only one result in order to get the answer, but probably to save some code space, they don't implement it that way. They just ask, are these different? Okay, throw the first one away, replace second to the first, ask again. So for TaskBot's sake, what if you give it a different button input every single time until you finish out the end of the frame? The garbage collection related stuff that's supposed to happen at the end of the frame that's built into the game doesn't happen. And now important values are set to things they're not supposed to be set to. And now you can do arbitrary code execution.
Oh, that's amazing.
They did a run of Super Mario Bros. 3 that, if I remember correctly, was beaten in 13 frames.
Whoa.
Because that last frame they give different... Well, I guess the frame before that, they give different inputs over and over and over and over again until the frame ends.
And the win condition is to get to the final screen, right?
Yep.
You save the princess.
And it's a little glitchy too because there's none of that garbage collection stuff happens. So the actual like little credits part is kind of screwy looking.
Nice.
That's amazing. So, so one of the other topics you've gotten really into is polyglot, which means, I mean, normally that means like you call someone a polyglot if they speak multiple languages or something. In the context of computers, it's files that are more than one thing at a time.
Yep. So, there's an individual named Ange Albertini who's basically like an absolute master, a ninja at this. And he has worked with a journal called, and is it alright if I use the F word because it's part of a proper noun in this case?
We're all very big fans of this.
We
Okay.
all know. We're
International
all big.
Journal of Proof of Concept, or get the fuck out.
Which is Travis Goodspeed's
Yep.
project. We're all very familiar with Travis.
Reverend Pastor Manuel Lefroy.
Yeah.
Oh, right. He's doing the
I can never
Discordian thing.
tell if it was defrog or defrag, because defrag would make sense for like defragmenting.
That's a solid point. I think you've got it.
But Ange Albertini has done a lot of polyglot files, including talks. And one of his analogies is, imagine, well, I'm going to butcher this analogy, so my apologies on that, but imagine you're trying to identify an animal, and you can determine if something is a cat by looking at the head of the animal and seeing if it's the head of a cat. And you can determine if something's a cow based on looking at the like rear end of the animal and seeing if that's a cow. So if you take a cow and stick a cat in the front half of it, both checks will be true. So it is currently a cat and a cow. The analogy I tend to go with is you have a plot of land, just a couple acres of land, and you decide to put a house there. So that is your home. You also decide to put like some fencing around, stick some animals there. It is now also a zoo. It is a home and it is a zoo. And then you decide to stick a pond there, maybe some like playground equipment. It is now also a park. All three are true at the same time. You just have this block of data and you can stick other things inside of it. And if you ask the person who checks to see if it's a zoo, they'll say yes. And because they said yes does not mean that it's not a home as well.
I think my favorite polyglot that I've seen those guys do was the PDF that's also an MBR for x86 that is a game of asteroids.
Nice.
Or is it Space Invaders? I can't remember. But, yeah, it's like a zip file, a PDF of like how they did it, and like the actual game in its compiled form as a master boot record, like all in one.
That's awesome.
I enjoy when they occasionally will make it also its own Git repository.
Yeah.
So some files are identified by magic numbers at the beginning, and some files are identified by the presence of a dictionary or something at the end, which has a magic number. So I know that most binaries have a magic number at the beginning. I happen to know that. I know that that NES ROMs start with a magic number at the beginning.
Yep, which I wish it didn't, but it does.
Yeah.
Game Boy
And,
ROMs do not, though. They only care about hex 150 being correct, and then onward for like 256 bytes or so for the header data. But the beginning stuff is some interrupt vectors, most of which you're never going to use, so it doesn't matter if you put other data there.
Oh, so Game Boy ROMs then would be good candidates for polyglots.
I made a PDF that's also a zip file, that's also an HTML file, that's also an NES ROM, that's also a Game Boy ROM.
That's
Wow.
amazing. Could it play?
Can you
Could
do
it play
like
the game in its own
army
emulator?
thing where like it jumps, like I've seen shellcode polyglots like that, where it's like one thing on the top and then basically it does like a opcode split, and if that's not correct, it just jumps to the bottom where all the code's correct.
In these cases, it's just because it's just a chunk of, in this case, 32 kilobytes of data. So everything could fit onto a single EEPROM. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think I may have made it work. So wait, no. Never mind that. I thought I had something there, but in this case, because it's just a 32 kilobyte chunk of data, it doesn't matter what's there as long as things it expects are in expected spots. And considering a lot of it, you can specify where code starts. So if you just specify that it starts later on in the file, and now you have some extra room earlier on in the file that you can stick some like NES ROM data. And that particular polyglot file essentially will say something along the lines of, on the HTML side of things, it'll say this HTML file is also an NES ROM, Game Boy ROM, zip file, blah blah blah, and then each version will say this type of file is also, and then all the other types of files, including the zip file side, or if you unzip it, the comment that it gives says the same thing.
That's the Quine, right? Sort of.
Kind of. It at least kind of references itself. A lot of the NES games I make tend to also be zip files that include the source code that you can then use to build to make the ROM that's also a zip file that includes its source code that you can then build to make a NES ROM that's also a zip file that contains the source code. At which point would be a two-step Quine, because it doesn't print its own source code. It takes like one step before it produces the exact same output.
So zip files are popular to use in polyglots because they're one where there's actually like a dictionary at the end. So in order for like a file utility to determine, oh, this is file type zip file, they look at the end, for the zip dictionary. And this actually came up in security, which is one of our favorite safe spaces. But this came up in security recently with the jar bug, where you could take a binary like an ELF, or not an ELF, but a PE for Windows, whatever arbitrary PE you wanted, and then you could tack a legitimately signed zip file, jar file, which is just a zip file with a specific manifest in it. But you could find an Authenticode signed jar file, tack that to the end of your binary, and in certain circumstances, make the system believe that your binary was more trusted than it really was, because it would go and say, oh, this is a jar file. We'll skip to the end and check the signature. Oh, that's a valid signature. And then it would be like, that's an Authenticode signed binary. And you'd be like, just kidding. It's a malware PE I made. So that's actually been useful even this past year for EDR evasion. And another example I can think of is back in the Internet Explorer 6 days. Internet Explorer 6 did something called MIME sniffing, where if there was a disconnect between the magic number of the file and the extension of the file, for example, if you made a PNG file and changed the extension to JPEG, Internet Explorer would be like, well, now I don't know who to believe, the magic number of the extension, and it would start looking into it would start from the beginning of the file, going forward, and making random, poorly programmed guesses as to what sort of file this really was. So a popular way of getting script execution through an image in Internet Explorer 6 was to make a PNG file, give it a JPEG extension, and then go in and make an EXIF tag near the beginning of the file that had executable JavaScript in it. So what Internet Explorer would do would say, hey, there's a mismatch between the magic number and the extension. It would start reading into the file, see your script tag, and decide this was really HTML, and it should render it like HTML, thus executing the script that was inside the image. So in case anybody didn't know that Internet Explorer was a pile of crap, this is more proof of that.
Well, yeah, and then another example of the browser case that happened later on, right, is and this was jars strike again, although temporally this might have happened before the example case that you described, where you would use that, you would effectively append jar files to other image files, so that any file upload system would approve, view it as an image file, write it to disk or whatever long-term storage it was using, and then the Java extensions for all browsers at the time would check the actual the actual manifest for the jar file at the end of the file. So you'd have a valid GIF that would be rendered by user agents. You would also have a valid jar file that would be loaded. And at the time, the same origin policy, for those who are not aware, that the way that user agents determine the authorization in association to executing logic. Anyway, the point is that each of the extensions got to define same origin policy themselves, right? And so Java would always assign the origin in association to the running jar file from where it was hosted, not who was doing the loading. So you'd in effect have a same origin policy bypass, which is the same goal you attempt to achieve with XSS. But that one was really fun and plagued every modern browser for a while till we got that fixed.
Because there's a lot of
similar one too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's a lot of sites where
browser
you can
extensions
upload.
Suck basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of sites where you can upload images, right? And it would be bad if you could upload executable Java applet code.
Right.
Yeah.
Along that line, there was something that worked for a while, and the image hosting site fixed this without me ever having to mention it, so I'm a little sad about this, and I won't name names, but it was a popular one. they used to not strip any of the excess data out of images. They also used the image's header to determine how long it was for the check. So you could just
Amazing.
append a gigabyte of data to the end of it. Now that 15 megabit limit, no, that's just gone.
Yeah, file storage and image sites. That was I remember that too. Those are
Then
fun.
there's the fun part too of that's an image which is going to be cached in a web browser. So now you can start attacking based on their image cache.
Oh.
So you could just have them go to some website that has some iframe or something that loads that image. That image is now being run in that browser, and then you can have that
Right.
set iframe. As long as it's calling the cached image and the same origin, so the headers and stuff are nicely enough handled, it will notice, hey, I've looked at this image before. I should just I should display this image without even bothering to check if that image still exists. So it'll ask to show an image. It goes, hey, I've seen that image before. So, yeah, now you can get cache-based attacks. Unfortunately, said image hosting website seems to have fixed it without me ever having to mention it to them. So I'm a little sad.
Well, it's kind of a widely known best practice now that you need to strip all metadata out of images. And a common trick for that is resizing the image, no matter what.
Mhm.
Even if you're resizing it to the same size. So you're making another file entirely with no metadata. But the really frustrating thing about polyglots for me is that the three main platforms with their binary formats, Mako, PE, and ELF, are all they all have magic numbers at the start of the file that would conflict with each other. Mm-hmm. So it's the dream has always been to make one binary that you could execute on just natively on every operating system. But you just can't do that apparently.
This is why you try to convince a standards body to be created.
Oh.
I created a standards body because the three previous standard bodies I didn't agree with.
Yeah, that's. I was waiting for someone to make that joke.
I mean, well, that kind of happened with these.
Oh, is that a Palm VX you just held up?
Yep.
I love those things. I had one.
I can't find a charger for it currently though, but
I probably have someone in this pile of chargers somewhere, but
I think I had one of those for approximately, I don't know, 2 months, and then dropped it, and then the screen cracked, and
that was the gateway drug. That was the gateway drug to my first smartphone, which was like a Trio 180 or something like that. Because that was it's like your Palm VX, but now it can be a cell phone. And if only I'd known what a dark road that was going to turn out to be. But so I got another polyglot question. So you made a polyglot that was 5 different things. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, do you know what the record is, or are you aware of someone that's made one that's more than 5?
Let me see if I've made one more than 5. I had to think through this. Let's see. NES ROM, HTML file, brainfuck file, zip file, 7-zip file, RAR file. I have one with 6. And I know Ange Albertini's been kind of working on one that's a bit more, but yeah, there easily could be more file type. For instance, that Game Boy polyglot one that I mentioned before, I could have also made it a RAR file and a 7-zip file, so I could have made it 2 more. But I'm sure there's some sort of audio format, file format somewhere that checks at the end for a header. It also gets confusing too, because zip files in particular, some zip file extractors will start from the beginning to try to find that end of record thing, and
what?
some will check from the end going towards the beginning.
Why would you ever start from the beginning?
Because it's just quicker and easier to do that, especially if you're checking more than one file type. So if they didn't realize they're not supposed to check from the beginning and they're supposed to go from the end, now you can make a zip file that's different depending on which extractor opens it.
Right. So I guess like I wanted to jump in on the methodology questions for playing around with polyglots. Like, I mean, I assume that there's a community around these that take inventory of hilariously poorly implemented parsers, right, and ways to mess with it. But like, I mean, that's a lot of contextual information to be able to create, files that can be misinterpreted as 5, 6, 7 different file types. Like, is that something that's purely driven through the community where, people just pass that information to and fro, or are you, really
I
going
guess
through and
so.
digesting every specification to look for these types of conditions?
It's kind of both, and I don't know of much of a community for this. I personally know Evan Soltanic, Evan Terran, and Ange Albertini, all of which have written for Proof of Concept or Get the Fuck Out.
Right.
And that's it.
And I think POC or GTFO is very, like, Travis is super into polyglots. So a lot of the episodes, a lot of the issues of POC or GTFO have been themselves polyglots. And there have been like several articles, including, I think, one you wrote, right?
Yep, in issue 18. So I guess slightly moving backwards in time. So issue 14 was an NES. Well, so I guess it was a PDF file that printed out its own MD5 hash. And was also a GIF, 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 whatever people decide to argue in the
GIF. GIF is the new thing I'm using.
We're calling it GIF from now on.
Yeah, you use gyro or something, right?
It was an animated image format that displayed its own MD5 hash, and then was also an NES ROM that displayed its own MD5 hash. All at the same time, and the NES ROM side of things, the article explained how to make a PDF file that was also an NES ROM. I tried to reproduce that proof of concept. I tried to make my resume into a copy of Super Mario Bros. So I can do like a very esoteric way of soliciting pirated material. And I failed at it, and I failed hard at it, and I thought it was because I didn't know enough about NES development. Fast forward a couple months later, turns out, no, I didn't know enough about PDF files. So I went the completely wrong direction, but now I know how to make NES ROMs. And so that was issue 14. Issue 18, I had my article added into there, which was titled Concealing Zip Files in NES ROMs, which the issue 14, it was also a zip file as well, but the PDF and zip file stuff kind of was outside of the NES ROM data. And the NES header was still at the beginning, but most of the actual, like, the meat of the NES ROM was not touching any of the zip file or PDF stuff. So I wanted to make an NES ROM where if it was dumped from a cartridge, the resulting ROM will be a zip file. And I decided, because of how small the zip file ended up being, not zip file, the NES ROM, and I guess zip file too, I decided it could be a fun little treat for hackers to have it be its source code. And then have the make file of said source code recompile or reassemble things to be the same zip file. And just for extra fun, I decided to set the operating system of the zip file to Atari ST, because why not?
So the PDF format, you said, oh, you didn't know enough about the PDF format. I would make the argument, based on the little I know about PDF, that anything you know is probably too much.
Fair.
Yeah, I actually tried to read through the PDF file spec at one point, and it was like, I don't know, trying to read Lovecraft on acid or something. I was like, I need to stop. I need to stop doing this for the sake of my own sanity.
I've noticed
Yeah.
So I've noticed when writing a PDF file in Vim, like from scratch, it sucked. But at least it's very text based for its format.
Surprisingly,
That's a special form of digital masochism.
I was going to say that's a strange flex right there. Oh, it's one time.
It's
I was
easy.
writing a PDF in Vim, as you do.
But I noticed if you don't set the fonts and such, you can get some weird kerning. You can get some weird text size issues and stuff. So I started remembering old, like, counterfeit Yu-Gi-Oh cards I used to have, where the text would always be, like, different sizes. Kerning would be really weird. And I think they just stuck an image and then wrote the data into the location into a PDF file. Because it looks just like those counterfeit cards.
Oh, that's amazing.
Whenever you end up writing a PDF file from scratch.
Yeah, I've done similar things, and yeah, the kerning gets all messed up.
Well, the one weird thing I remember about PDF is like there's a way in which it can be a vector art file, and there's a way in which it can contain actual text, or both. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of like, it's like a loose collection of objects that are all linked together kind of mess going on.
Yeah, it's weird, and I don't want to get too much into PDFs in my lifetime.
Yeah, right.
I figured out enough to make PDF files as long as it has I think it's XREF table at the end, then I can make a polyglot file out of it. And that's all I need to know.
Yeah, right. So it is another one. I figured from the way you were stacking up things in the polyglot that the PDF must be one that's identified by looking for the something at the end.
A lot of the readers that I've seen start from the beginning and then just try to find the header of the PDF and does not care if it's at the beginning or not. And that's it. And then as soon as it hits the beginning of it, it doesn't even require you to change offsets of where things are. It just says, this is the beginning, let's set this to offset 0, and then set all of the offsets based on that 0.
So it's very polyglot friendly. Yeah.
It is a lot more polyglot friendly than I expected it to ever be. I believe No, I don't even have to have the PDF header thing at the beginning. Yeah, it just... I stick a PDF file. I don't know if it has to be within a certain amount of bytes from the beginning, but it just works.
So if we're done with this, I'd like to change gears a little bit on the subject of strange flexes. So looking at your Hope Talk, the most notable thing from the Hope Talk is that you actually did your slide deck as an actual NES cartridge, which means
including making the slideshow program that actually displays it in that as well, and over 100 slides.
And not only that, so that means you're already at the whims of the demo gods for your strange hardware setup to work on the projector, right? On stage at a conference. So right there, that almost never works, right? Sometimes just plugging an HDMI port into a laptop doesn't work.
Yeah, you might end up being Richard Stallman.
Yeah. Well, and then, but this is like 2 steps further. So then during the transitions between some of your slides, so you did this whole section where you're like, I've identified, alternate means of giving input to a NES cartridge other than just the buttons on the controller, right? So one of them was detecting the reset button being pressed. Mm-hmm. And another one was pressing simultaneously right and left on the controller at the same time, which the controller physically stops you from doing. But if you custom modify the controller, yeah,
yep,
and remove the rocker switch thing, you can press those buttons down simultaneously. But you actually had transitioning from one slide to the next, totally reliant on that working. Right. Mm-hmm. So you had one that you had to press the reset button to get to the next slide, and another one where you had to press both right and left simultaneously to get to the next slide. And I was just, and the audience literally starts applauding when this works at random times, and you were like, why are you applauding? But like,
and
I
my
told-
favorite input method, which is a game genie.
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, of course, requiring someone actually patch a bit in memory with the game genie to advance from one slide to the next. So like, I think you might have figured this out later, but obviously the reason everyone is applauding is because your very tenuous demo just kept working, and it's like watching a juggling act or something, right? Where you're like, it's like, now we're gonna light the swords on fire, and everyone's like, holy shit.
You
You
did
know,
the
so
technical
in the face of
equivalent
the
of an
demo gods.
unintended, like,
Basically,
stunt performance. Like,
I figured out more input sort of things as well over time. So for instance, in that talk, it also is able to determine whether it's being played on a Dendy, a PAL region NES, or an NTSC region NES. Since then, using information that was written by Damian Yarrick, who's been in the NES development scene since the 2000s at least, using information I have learned from his documentation, you can determine as well whether or not the console is a Famicom versus an NES. So like an NTSC NES, so you can determine which of those two it is. You can determine if it is an NES, whether it is a top loader or a front loader.
Whoa.
So, which, with these, this isn't going to be on the Santa tracker. I'm thinking a further version of my ISS tracker might have this, which is basically on the same engine. If the console is noticed to be PAL region and a top loader, I know that the console originated from Australia or New Zealand, because they only sold those in Australia and New Zealand, which means I can mess with my Australian and New Zealander friends by either removing Australia and New Zealand from the map or turning the entire game upside down.
Amazing.
Well, so I was watching you work on your Santa tracker on Twitch last night.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I noticed that Santa was spending a lot of time hanging around Perth, Australia.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that was a bug or not, but I thought
He spends a decent amount of time in Australia, and then the dates and time they usually go for is around that particular date and time, in order to just kind of check to make sure everything's working well enough. I only just got that finished, and I had so little sleep today because of that.
So
yeah.
If people don't obviously know what a Santa tracker is without seeing it, which I didn't before I got the link to your Twitch stream, and you're like, oh, I'm developing a Santa tracker, and I was like, what's a Santa tracker? And then as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, of course. Could you just describe that for our listeners?
So since I believe the mid-50s, NORAD has been tracking Santa publicly for people. The origin story of that is kind of an adorable story. I'm probably going to butcher the story with some hearsay, I guess, but from what I've gleaned of it, essentially some company has decided they were going to track Santa. They accidentally did a typo for their phone number, which happened to go to a NORAD number, a private NORAD number, I believe. One for like direct line from the president sort of lines. during when the US and the Soviet Union were kind of at each other's throats. And all of a sudden you get this like 8-year-old girl that asks, where is Santa? And them being the good sports that they are, provide the information, and ever since has tracked Santa. Unfortunately, this is not using NORAD's Santa tracker, because NORAD would not give me their information. I know, I asked them. But, so I'm using the Google Santa Tracker API, and the last few years, it turns out Santa is extremely consistent on Santa always leaves the North Pole at 10 a.m. UTC on December 24th. Always. Exactly. To the millisecond. Leaves the North Pole at that time. Takes exactly 9 minutes to get to his first stop. Exactly. Every time. And all of the stops are consistent. I think we should be getting Santa to be put in charge of making the trains run on time. He seems to be extremely consistent. But because of that, I was able to make a Santa tracker for any year, assuming Google doesn't decide that Santa's moved to different locations and stuff. Assuming like a continent doesn't just fall into the sea or something in the next 900 years, we're good.
So it shows as an NES cartridge, it shows Santa like flying around the world, starting from the North Pole, hitting everywhere, and then eventually going back.
Yep. So there's just a world map, and Santa with a sleigh and reindeer, and as sprites, and then essentially Santa's always like right in the middle of the screen, except for height wise. So the latitude will change based on the latitude, but the longitude changes the scrolling of the NES game itself. But it uses the exact same board type as Super Mario Bros. And in fact, for the weird screen splitting to allow the world map to shift left and right compared to that top bar of latitude and longitude and stuff, uses the exact same method as Super Mario Bros. So you could just desolder the EEPROMs from Super Mario Bros. And stick EEPROMs with this program and solder those in, and it'll work. Like, you don't need to change any solder blobs for its mirroring or anything.
Oh, that's cool.
Nice.
So there's that's interesting. So there's actually some kind of hardware component to the mirroring and how the map goes by.
So to make things easier for the NES, essentially you have picture processing unit memory that there will be a name table, and the name table is essentially the 256 by 240 pixel window that you see on the screen. And there's essentially 2 of those windows wide and 2 of those windows tall. And to make scrolling easier for some games, or more specifically, like, you know how with some games, like, for instance, Balloon Fight, you go off of the right and you'll appear off of the left.
Yeah.
To make that sort of thing easier, mirroring is implemented on the NES. So 2 of the windows will be exactly the same. So you have window 0, essentially, that you will draw on, and the mirroring is a hardware sort of switch thing that you basically jump a connection to determine whether it is the window to the right or the window down from window 0 that is the exact same as window 0. So if you need to like scroll like with Super Mario Bros., it has vertical mirroring because you need to move left and right, so it wouldn't be useful to have the same data like horizontally from each other, because then if you run off of the side, you're going to see like the title screen again, or whatever screen you were just in. And because the NES is extremely limited with drawing, you can draw maybe about 64 8x8 pixel tiles every frame, because you have to draw during vertical blank, and that is not much time. That is like 40 scan lines.
Wow, this is some deep Nintendo stuff. So now that you mentioned vertical blank, speaking of the other impossible dream project, so there was long ago, Byte magazine existed, and in the July 1990 issue of Byte magazine, there was an article on virtual data gloves for virtual reality and how that was going to be the future at the time, 1990. And in that article, there were instructions for how to wire a power glove to the parallel port of your PC and use it as an input device. So back a few years later, when Doom came out, I had a power glove, and I was like, I want to play Doom with a power glove. So I literally had to go to a library. I had to go to a university library and find the actual copy of Byte from July of 1990, which is why I remember it was Byte from July 1990. I couldn't tell you a single article in any other magazine ever, right? But I had to go find a copy of this and then photocopy it because it was like, before I had internet access. Mm-hmm. And I went home and I wired the power glove to the computer, and sure enough, I could you could steer around in Doom, and you could even pull the trigger and have it detect that, and it was terrible, but it worked. Right?
Oh yeah, I've seen a few people do Super Mario Bros. 3 with the Power Glove. 2 people in particular, one of which said he'll never do it again, and the other person decided, well, that means this is a good idea.
Yeah, right. So I have I was always more interested in making the special Nintendo peripherals work on a real computer than I was in going into the guts of the Nintendo. So but of course the dream is, now that the era of the cathode ray tube is over, how do we play Duck Hunt? And not that backsliding Wii Duck Hunt with aliens, because no one thinks that counts. Or
the Wii U Virtual Console also had a Duck Hunt thing, but it patched things, I think, in real time to add a crosshair and use a Wii remote or something.
That's not real Duck Hunt. But as I recall, there was something weird with the light gun where there was something drawn on the screen that was the only thing the light gun really detected, or something like that happened during the vertical blanking. And I guess that only works right on cathode ray tubes or something.
So if I remember this correctly, so there's an individual, Brad, I believe his last name is Smith, who made the NES game Lizard, who worked on a project to get the light gun working on HD TVs. And he managed to successfully do it. If I remember correctly, the issue with the light gun assumes that scan lines will take a specific amount of time. A lot of flat screens will display the entire frame at the exact same time rather than one scan line at a time. And if I remember correctly, unintuitively, the screen actually displays the information too quickly for the light gun to read rather than too slowly. But yeah, the delay is definitely off, but I don't remember exactly which way it is off.
So someone has solved this problem already, is what you're saying?
Yes, but I think there's definitely some weird extra stuff basically taped onto the gun and possibly connected to the TV or something.
From the one that I saw, it was, I think they had something that they injected into the HDMI or something like that, and then it also took input from the gun. It was an FPGA, and they added a bright white square or something like that for a single frame, but they delayed it. I don't remember how that worked at all. Actually,
no, that sounds plausible.
Talk about it.
Yeah,
but
so
I think the delay issue still would have been there. So yeah.
So I just have my original light gun sitting in a box over there, waiting for somebody to make it work again.
I know there were a few light gun games where they would just check to see if you pull the trigger. Some of them to determine whether it was detecting light, and then Duck Hunt, considering it was a pack-in game originally on the NES. It is impressive that they programmed it in a way they would blink the screen, check that frame to make sure that the light gun was not detecting light, then flash the square to make sure that it was detecting light, and then flash back black again. So it determined whether or not you saw the square rather than just pointing it at a light bulb.
That's right, yeah. Because so there was definitely some of the games you could just point at a light bulb.
And then all of a sudden, everything just dies. It's great.
So now I could be wrong, but you don't exactly seem old enough to remember the July 1990 issue of
I
Byte
am
magazine.
not old enough to remember that.
Yeah, so I got to ask, given that this is kind of old-timey, tech, like how did you get so interested in this? Like what do you see in the old tech that's so appealing?
It's more straightforward. It's like how there's a lot of things right now that are kind of pushing a little too hard against Moore's law. So now you have to get some weird like AI involved in order to intelligently calculate things. Where, for instance, making I made an audio engine a couple years back ago that is a Bell 103 audio engine. Because that's just straightforward. It's just like it's
What is a Bell 103 audio engine?
So it will make the audio on both the sending and the receiving ends of a Bell 103 modem, which is a 300 baud modem. Which is made back in I think 1961, so before the internet.
I'm not even old enough to remember 300 baud.
Then I kind of have been editing that, or I guess making a new audio engine later on for the Bell 202 audio engine, which is the basis for 1200 baud. And then like it adds, just because why not? It's audio. Adds DTMF tones, also phone freaking capabilities. So green box, red box, blue box, clear box, or I guess beige. Yeah, beige box. I want to incorporate that into a Game Boy cartridge soon.
Oh, nice. We should hook you up with the Shady Tell people. They've been working on doing their own. They're making their own Switch. And so at
crossbar Switch, isn't it? Like
yeah. And at Tour Camp, which is an event we have out here every two years nominally, minus COVID. But every 2 years they do Tour Camp out here, and Shady Tell sets up an old time phone network that your Game Boy freaking software might actually work on, which would be pretty cool.
So 2018, CypherCon had some fun badges. So we, and I say we because the people that made the badges are also the people that run the hackerspace that I go to. So basically I got kind of sucked into helping set up the telephone network thing. They also had to put together some last minute badges, but those badges were actual like landline phones. So PCB with acrylic casing landline phones. They had fax modems inside of them. And yeah, they set up their entire like telephone network that can connect to other phones on the network during that conference, which is kind of a pain in the butt to find all the cables required and get all the power from a convention center when you have like a telco network thing set up. But yeah, it was an interesting year for sure. And one of my favorite badges of all time. Just the fact that it was literally a landline phone, so people would try out phone freaking. They'd do like, technically it was usually faster internet than 300 baud, but you could program it to do 300 baud if you wanted to. You just need a computer that can tell the modem, okay, do 300 baud instead of like 1200. But
so what was that? What was actually on the badge? It was a modem, or
there was a fax modem inside of the badges, which it was so we were putting together the badges into the conference.
Yeah, of
So
course.
they had the people that were doing the badges, the toy makers, had ordered those fax modems. And then suddenly Chinese New Year happened, which means getting things from China just ground to a stop entirely. And then there is an acquisition happening at that company for those fax modems as well. So it took a little longer, and then they decided after they had acquired that company to charge even more for the fax modems. And that's all the information I know on that. But that caused us to... Well, I didn't solder any of them, thank goodness. I basically said, I don't want to be spoiled by this, which is my way of excusing myself from having to solder a couple hundred badges. But yeah, everything was soldered in general. They still had some that needed to be tested and stuff at their desk during CypherCon, well into day 2. But most of it was just assembling the ones that worked, like the acrylic housings and then the PCB upper and lower layers and such. Still an amazing badge.
It's a common story of every conference badge ever.
That happened with the badge that I did for the Midwest Gaming Classic in 2019 as well. I was sitting at a table soldering a bunch of NES cartridges the entire time during the Midwest Gaming Classic. I would not recommend it to anyone.
So the fax modem badge, was that like a USB device or something you plugged into a computer to use it?
Yeah, so it had like the normal RJ40. Is it RJ11 or RJ40? I think it's RJ11.
RJ11.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it has an RJ11 port. It also had a micro USB port and was a USB serial device.
So I do want to point out RJ45 sockets are compatible with RJ11 plugs.
I just wanted to really stress the fact of like how old I am, that I actually remember RJ11. It's like, yeah, it had 4 wires, but you only needed 2, right? And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Unless you had call waiting.
4P4C.
Yeah, look it up. Okay, so so I want to you did a badge for the. I want to ask about your the badge you did for the Midwest Gaming Classic too. What was that like?
So it's just an NROM 256 board, the same type of board as Super Mario Bros. I just made like a general kind of arcade style game. Development was hell. I got to meet and unfortunately I forget his name, so I feel a little bad about this, but the individual who developed E.T. for the Atari 2600.
Oh god.
I got to meet him at the Midwest Gaming Classic, where we both got to complain about deadlines and programming for the 6502. In my case, I wanted to start development on the game in January. And then all of a sudden, it just kept like getting extremely cold to the point where occasionally, basically we had to focus more on heating our house than anything else because it was getting to like negative 40 degrees constantly because that was a polar vortex year.
Yeah, just for our coastal listeners who don't believe that's a real number, I'd like to. You're located in southern. That's right. So
yep.
I grew up in Milwaukee, and I can vouch for that. Like negative 40 is a thing that happens. They stop actually reporting the temperature because it's sort of meaningless, and they start describing the weather and the number of seconds it will take exposed skin to die and experience frostbite. Because you don't need to know the number anymore. You just need to know 15 seconds of exposed skin is going to be too much right now.
I mean, after negative 32, it's like Fahrenheit and Celsius agree for that?
40, so negative 40.
Negative 40 is when they agree? Okay, nice.
At which point, I don't even specify Celsius or Fahrenheit at that point, because it's just negative 40. And we've hit that, at least wind chill-wise, pretty consistently every single polar vortex. So, unfortunately, I couldn't get things done during January because we were focusing on, like, keeping things running in the house during that month. And then February, I decided, okay, now I'm going to do the programming. Well, we got hit with a ton of snow that February. So it would snow 12 inches. And then it would all blow back in after you spent 8 hours shoveling it. And then the next day, 8 more inches. And then it stops for like 2 days. Oh, 15 more inches. That sounds good. So that entire month sucked. So basically, as soon as March happened, starting March 1st, I actually finally got to start making the badge. And the CypherCon started, I believe, so CypherCon and the Midwest Gaming Classic would have been the week from April 6th to April 13th, somewhere in there. Starting March 1st, I was working average 120-hour weeks in order to get things done. Never doing that again. And then, let's see, April 6th to April 13th, I worked 162 hours in order to try to get this stuff done. And I also had to do a talk for CypherCon that particular week as well. So that was not a fun experience, and I was mostly just soldering things. I got my CypherCon slides done 5 minutes after I was supposed to start presenting.
Nice. That's another common story from conferences. So was the badge you made, was that was it like playable on the badge, or was it like a cart that you put into a Nintendo?
So there was like a clear sort of box that just a plastic box that the cartridge would be in, and then basically a hanger sticker sort of thing like they have for products at a store, and then a lanyard connected to that, and just a couple hundred of those. But yeah, it was a playable badge. There were some quirks in there where if you get a high score and then you die in the game, it'll give you a score code that you can then submit onto a website. Unfortunately, I implemented the score code incorrectly in the game.
No.
So I basically, there were 3 bytes essentially for the score part of the score code. And it accidentally zeroed out it encoded the data before it actually put the data into the spot that it was encoding.
Yeah.
Which that meant that I did not know what multiple of 256 points the player got at all. So if they tried submitting a score, I could determine at least that they were playing on that defective cart. So I'd basically tell the person, use a Game Genie with these 2 codes, and then your score codes will work. But you have to use these 2 codes every time with a Game Genie. But that's kind of a common occurrence with some of my games. If I release them and I make too many of them and ship them out, and then I notice there's an issue, it's just like, okay, can I patch it with a Game Genie? Do I need more than 1 Game Genie? So far, I've lucked out with the Midwest Gaming Classic badge. It was the instructions were 13 bytes off from requiring 2 Game Genies.
Wait, you can use 2 Game Genies at once?
Yep. So
What?
So
how do you? Oh my god!
So you use the first. So it goes from the console to the first Game Genie to the game. In this case, the first Game Genie is patching the second Game Genie and everything above it. So as long as the code you do doesn't interfere with the programming of the Game Genie, you can stack Game Genies on top of each other, getting 3
That's
codes per Game
insane.
Genie.
I had no idea. That's like the most interesting thing I've learned today.
The most Game Genies I've managed to get consistently working together has been 8. Because after a while it stresses the pins too much. Electricity just physically has to flow further in order to get things to work, and
8.
That's crazy.
I imagine you run into clock issues too at some point.
probably. I just know that after 8, the screen is either black or green, and that is it.
So,
Like at what point is it easier to just like rewrite the game on a different chip.
or reprogram every chip, I guess, right?
So, I've had issues with EPROMs will all be the storage will all be 1 bits, and you can program the 1 bits into 0 bits, but you can't flip it back without UV light. And if they're like shielded, or if they're closed off EPROMs, then you can't use UV light because it's like physically blocking.
So you're
Some
using
of them have a
EPROMs.
sticker. Yeah,
Mhm.
more or less. Some of them have a sticker, and you can pull the sticker back to expose the actual chip, and you spray the UV in there, and it'll actually clear it. But if they don't have this, if they don't have the sticker, it's
Can you
not
actually
Then
get-
it's just then it's just blacked out.
Can you get the ones with the quartz on them anymore? Is that are they still being manufactured?
Is that the electronically programmable, like the reprogrammable ones?
Technically-
the
technically-
UV ones is what I'm talking about. Can you
I
still
did.
get those?
I did work for a company a couple of years ago that had to maintain some 30-year-old control systems, and they were ultimately able to source some of those chips, but they were only able to get like 2 dozen. And I don't know if that was the end of the last supply in any warehouse anywhere, or what the deal was, but it was still possible to get them as of a few years ago, but it was like insanely difficult.
You can still get EEPROMs, like the electronically.
You can still get
erased ones.
EEPROMs, specific sizes. I can't find a 28C256, which is the EEPROM version of the EEPROMs that I'm using for a lot of the cartridges. There's also, so the way I've found a solution for it, I can't really make it work to reprogram them if they're already soldered onto the cartridge board, because the voltage requirement, and I don't speak electricity that well, I'm a software dev, but the voltage requirement is too high for what can really go through the NES cartridge, apparently. Where flash chips can be programmed with 5 volts, EEPROMs need like 15 or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, just to program them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And there's also that issue of you can flip 1s to 0s, but you can't flip them back in, let's just say, the masked version of the EEPROM. There are ways kind of around it if you intelligently have like some sort of jump. You could basically patch those EEPROMs, so you could add some data later on in the EEPROM and then modify the jump location, flip some 1s to 0s, and make it jump to a different location.
That sounds tricky.
Yeah, I think I've seen that trick before.
Just to do a plug for No Starch Press. No Starch Press actually makes the POC or GTFO collected editions available in a nice biblically bound edition. I know they have 2 volumes out collecting those.
I think they just came out with a 3rd one.
It's entirely possible. And although they are also not a sponsor of the podcast, they've given me personally enough free stuff over the years that.
And you can go back and listen to our interview with Bill Pollock, the founder of No Starch Press.
That's right. So I'm super interested in CypherCon. So I grew up in Milwaukee. There wasn't a lot of tech going on in Milwaukee, so I ended up, moving to the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day I was browsing through a random torrent site, searching for something I don't even remember, and all these CypherCon talks showed up, and I was like, what the fuck is CypherCon? And I look into it, and it's like, apparently there's a computer security conference in Milwaukee now. So I was like, definitely planning on going to it this year. So I'm gonna try and hit it, the next year it happens, for sure. But as someone who kind of grew up in Milwaukee, I'm really, really curious as to what CypherCon is like.
It's definitely different feeling from DEF CON. We've had some people that came in kind of from the Vegas area to CypherCon, and a lot of them, in kind of a strange way, complained that it wasn't like DEF CON, but you really can't expect Milwaukee to be like DEF CON. The Midwest definitely has a different feel to it than Vegas.
I would consider that a plus.
But CypherCon, I've enjoyed it every year that I've gone there. There's just kind of this very, I guess, weirdly enough, sterile sort of feel, but it's like Hack for Kids over there. So, and I believe there's a Roots Con that happens like immediately before or during or something, where basically kids can learn kind of introduction to hacking sort of things. Joe Grand was there during CypherCon 2018 and did the keynote for the Roots kids. But otherwise there's like safe cracking village rather than the lock picking village, the cipher village rather than the crypto village, but there's kind of analogs for a lot of these things. I remember seeing the car hacking village over there. I know there was a hardware hacking village. I think there was a wireless hacking village, and I think last time I was there they brought shot callers to basically play chicken with. But yeah, it's a nice hacker conference. The talks tend to be very well done. It definitely feels different from DEF CON, but like in a good way, in my opinion.
That's actually really interesting to me. So in the history of Midwestern hacker cons, there like the oldest one that I'm aware of was Rubicon in Detroit, which was not kid friendly. And if you ever hear any Rubicon stories, you'll be surprised anyone survived. And then after that couldn't happen anymore for various reasons. The one I went to the most was Nauticon in Cleveland, which is run by Froggy, and that started to be a little bit more kid friendly, like during the actual talks, during some of the games. This was before conferences were really doing the village thing. But one of the best things about there were two really awesome things about Nauticon. One was this game they did called Anything But Ethernet, where you had to make some kind of Rube Goldberg machine that would transfer bits, from over there to over here, and you would get points for having the most links, most different sorts of links in your chain, and having the most esoteric or weird links. So, for example, a friend of mine developed a IP over gun, where he had a computer-controlled BB gun that would like shoot one of 8 targets to transmit an octet.
That's amazing.
And like move the gun around. And then the other one I remember was somebody just translated their bits into high voltage spikes they transmitted over barbed wire, and that was the winner one year. But
I saw one year that was like the infrared, like the remote, like the TV remote control LEDs, where somebody built like an array of them, and they like daisy chained a bunch of them together, and they did a thing, which I thought was cool.
Yeah.
Somebody used a similar concept with like years later for when we ran Barcode Schmarcode at ShmooCon for like the first or second year, where somebody figured out exactly what like nanometer of red that the laser is on barcode scanners, and they made like an LED that just blinked, like it was like a photosensor that would just sense for when the laser hit it, and it didn't care what the timing was, because those things are scanning, so it would just hit it, and then hitting it would just reply with the same timing like 5 times or 10 times in a row by blinking an LED, and assume that like one of those would catch it, and it worked like every time. It was kind of cool.
That kind of reminds me of I think it was Sammy Kamkar's his wireless credit card transmitter essentially.
Oh,
So
the mag spoof. That was actually so there was a ShmooCon talk done by a friend of mine back in 2003 that was the same thing as that, except over a parallel port. So that's actually and I'll point out that the same technology appeared in Terminator 2. Which was from the early 90s. So people have known that you can emulate mag card strips, right? Because it's basically you're pulling a bunch of magnetic bumps past a coil, and you can emulate that by instead of physically pulling magnetic bumps past a coil, you can just put a wire loop on top of the coil and use a computer to raise and lower the current on the line, which causes an EM spike also. And then the whole trick is you have to control the timing from software, and that's a problem that's been solved many times throughout history.
I do enjoy the fact that turns something that would normally be considered like a physical sort of analog thing into a wireless means of communication.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, that's just like the old 2600 article that used to repeat itself about using a cassette tape like reader as a card reader by repurposing the mag end, and it was a thing.
Yeah, same principle. So the other thing I really liked about Nauticon was they eventually hooked up with like the demo scene people and like Radman from Acid, and they had this whole like demo party thing at Nauticon in the last few years, and that was pretty great. But the reason I bring this up is because the part of Nauticon that wasn't really kid friendly was the parties. So in a Cleveland hotel, you can get away with basically anything you want. And so we would like have these epic hotel room parties and feel really guilty when the cleaners came in the morning. But then we kind of stumbled on the fact that you could offer them what was left of our bottles of booze, and then they would say nothing. They would be super happy. They'd be like, "Free booze? Sure, we'll clean up this flooded room." And like we had no damage deposit problems or anything, and it was super weird. And I've always attributed that to like Cleveland being Cleveland on some level. But
like I remember going to like Freaknik back in the day, and like Skydog Con when it was in its infancy, and like people did the same kind of shit.
Oh yeah. But the non-DEF CON conferences are it's interesting to see those get kind of more kid friendly and more kind of focused on the youth. I think it's actually a really good thing, especially for the parts of the country that don't have as much of an existing tech sector. But in one of those Nauticon parties though, one of those is where kind of dual core got started. Like we got very drunk and tried to have a freestyle contest, and then everyone rapped so poorly. These kids from Cincinnati took over and were like, "Oh no, you want us to rap about nerdy shit? Well, we already know how to rap, so here we go." And it was like freaking epic. But literally across the hall from that was the first stun gun chicken game I saw happen. And it's interesting to me that is the one aspect of Nauticon that seems to be perpetuated by CypherCon now, with the shot collar chicken. So I don't know if that's a Midwest tradition or not, but there's two instances right there. So, you just need three to make a trend, I guess. Yeah, there's a line.
Exactly.
So the other
Midwest, right?
What's up?
I was trying to think if like Freaknik and stuff counts as Midwest. I'm like, what's Nashville? Nashville counts as Midwest, right?
No, that's the South.
Yeah, that's the South.
If they have a Waffle House, it's the South. There are other ways of describing it, but I'll get in trouble. So, so the other thing I'm really interested in hearing about is your hackerspace. So there's a hackerspace in southern Minnesota. So and they're apparently super, doing lots of stuff. So
the people that run the hackerspace have done quite a lot of badges. Which means people that go to the hackerspace tend to get roped into like soldering things, basically being a pick and place. And yeah, there's some fun stuff going on over there. There is the kind of issue with a lot of hackerspaces where, especially if you're not exactly like in a big tech sector, each hackerspace session turns into mostly talking. I guess, and a lot less about tech, which is just kind of an unfortunate part of the human aspect of things. But fun things have happened over there. It's basically the closest access to like a wood shop that I have. And yeah, they're currently trying to set up the telephone network that they had for CypherCon into something that can be connected to over the internet for the patrons of the toy makers. Which I unfortunately don't remember what their Patreon was, but they're trying to get that set up.
What is the hackerspace called?
The Rabbit Hole.
Oh, and what kind of space is it in?
It's in the basement of the owner's house.
Ah, nice.
So they're just a room in the basement for have some like computer related stuff if people need to do like graphic art or something. Which I believe also has a silk screening setup, like a handmade silk screening setup, and I think also has a laser cutter in there currently.
Nice.
And then another room for woodshop related stuff. For a while, there was an individual that was making a violin every week for like I think about 2 years.
Wow.
The same violin or a different violin every week?
Oh, that would be interesting. That could be a YouTube channel all on its own. But yeah, just the same violin every week. And then there's just kind of a general location for people to sit that has 2 dumb terminals connected to a computer connected to that telephone network.
Nice.
Nice.
So people play like Adventure, Zork, stuff like that on the dumb terminal.
So being on the West Coast, the amount of stuff that you described in that basement is entirely unfathomable. Unfathomable.
Yeah, the basement is also above ground level.
Okay.
Which is also kind of strange.
Isn't that a first floor?
But like half of it's below the ground, half of it's above the ground, just because they're on a very steep hill. Well, the house was built on a very steep hill.
So is that usable in January?
Yes, not quite so in May. The first year that I showed up, this was the May, and you might actually remember this, when it snowed a bunch in like May 2nd. We had hit the month record in about 4 hours.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to get like 4 inches of snow, and like the local on the 8s on the Weather Channel was saying that the location would hit maybe like 3 inches of snow, as there was already like 18 inches of snow on the ground. And then all of that melted very quickly because that May also hit 90 degrees multiple times.
So there is a stereotype about Midwesterners on the coast where we always talk about the weather.
Yeah,
and I'm just hoping that somewhere in here people are picking up on why that is.
Yeah, it
right?
sucks.
'Cause
there's also continuing on really quick with the May situation. So the toy makers had left to like California, New Mexico, and stuff, Arizona to visit friends in that area, and then they got back and their basement was flooded.
Ooh,
because it hit like 70 to 90 degrees almost immediately after it snowed a crap ton. So they had to redo their flooring and stuff. So the first couple months that I was there, that was also the summer of Snowden. So that was an interesting time, like very memorable time.
But
it's
basically,
just how I remember it. 2013, summer of Snowden, summer of flooding.
You got to talk about the weather because that shit's trying to kill you. Right. So
Yeah.
you gotta compare notes with people pretty regularly to stay on top of it.
I have noticed as well, specifically with Minnesotans, if someone talks about it being cold, if one place in Minnesota happens to be colder than the rest of us Minnesotans will talk about how it was that cold. If a place in Minnesota manages to get a foot of snow and we got like half an inch, we will talk about having a foot of snow. We will talk about how Minnesota had a foot of snow.
Duluth always wins. So all right. So I think last couple topics here. So
Oh,
what
and
is
I will mention as well, because of the intro, it might be good to talk about calendar at some point.
oh
Otherwise,
yeah,
the intro
absolutely.
won't make sense.
That's a solid point. So let's go into a couple of your NES projects that we haven't touched yet. So what is this the calendar?
So I've had an obsession with calendars since I was very little. Just the fact that like every year starts on a different day, but it's this cycle, but it's not exactly this neatly defined. I mean, it's neatly defined, but not like in a 4-year-old's mind. And then leap years get into things as well. So there's this kind of cycle with the cycle of cycles inside of it to make things really messy. But ever since I was little, I obsessed over the fact that calendar years are different every year. I thought that leap years were just every 4 years. Then it turned out, nope, it's every 4 years, except for the Gregorian rule. So if the year ends in 00, it is not a leap year unless it's divisible by 400, which none of us would ever notice because 2000 was a leap year. And that just handles like every other leap year. It's every 4 years. But I've been making basically merging two of my obsessions together, calendars and NES games together into a universal calendar, so you could set the year, the month, for any year between 999,909 BC to 999,999 AD.
For which locales are you making it valid for?
Well, and does it handle like the weird like months where they shifted from one calendar to the next?
Only one of the calendar types. So the Roman calendar, yes. So in 1582, I guess technically close to like 1580, 1581 or so, Pope Gregory at the time had noticed that Easter was shifting further and further away from spring. So because of that, they were noticing that the Earth doesn't travel around the sun in 365.25 days. It's closer to 365.2425 days. So they needed to kind of account for that. So every 400 years, they needed to get rid of 3 leap years. So they changed the system from every 4 years is a leap year to every 4 years is a leap year unless the year ends in 00, then it must also be divisible by 400. But this calendar will be able to handle that particular October when it switched from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar.
And that October was like 11 days long or something like that.
Let's see, it went from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 15th, 16th, 17th, all the way to the 31st. So it skips the 5th to the 14th.
So I actually thought that was the shortest month ever until I met you, and you actually have a couple other contenders for what might have been the shortest month.
Just January and February potentially of 1751 in the English calendar. So the English calendar, at least, I haven't been able to figure out consistently when the year started, but according to the legislature of the Calendar Act of 1750 in the UK, well, in Great Britain, the year started on March 25th. So year 1752 was the year that they switched from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, which is in September, I believe, and then added 11 days. So there was 11 days skipped rather than 10 for the Roman calendar, which would have meant that 1751 would have started March 25th, and then would have been April 1751 all the way to January, and they had set January 1st in that act as the first day of the year. So it would have gone, instead of December 1751 to January 1751, which would have normally happened. It goes December 1751 to January 1752. So February and January would not have existed those years. Well, that particular year in England, potentially. So I guess if you have a month of 0 days, that would be shortest.
A month of 0 days sounds like fun, but for a totally different reason. So I got to ask, your fascination with calendar systems and your fascination with computers, did that start around the same time, or were you into calendars first?
I was into calendars for as long as I can remember. Like literally as long as I can remember. And computers, I used to like make websites and stuff and claim that I did websites for bigger groups than I actually did them for. But thankfully that was in a past situation that isn't recorded on the internet. So no
Until
one can
now.
cringe too hard. I'm not going to say who I claimed and who I claimed to, but at least I don't have to cringe over the specifics on that. And then, so I quit high school back in 2010 and then decided to figure out how to do programming like immediately afterwards. And not for like a particular job or whatever. It's just I wanted websites to do more than just CSS and HTML could do. So I figured I should learn how to do JavaScript, and I got sidetracked with learning PHP instead. With like MySQL, learned how to make horrible servers that way that are extremely insecure, as everyone needs to dip their toe into first, and then like Python, stuff like that a year later.
How long did it take you to figure out that PHP was an awful language?
It a little longer than I wish it would have, because at the time the hosting services and stuff that I was using had like PHP MyAdmin and stuff like that, and allowed for PHP to be used. That was my only option, because I didn't know how to set up like a Linux server that has ports facing out to the internet and stuff like that at that time. So PHP was just what I used.
I remember the moment my switch flipped on PHP is when I read the documentation page for the function parse_str.
Yeah.
Which is still in there, but you're just really not supposed to use it. But what it does is it takes a web URL like parameter string, and then makes those into variables inside PHP. So it takes the name value pairs from a web request and just makes them into variables. But it stomps, by default, it will stomp all existing variables, even down to the global scope. So if anyone's using parse_str, you can send it a string that'll like turn safe mode on and off, or turn magic quotes on and off, or enable remote includes and stuff like that. It's just like absolute madness. It's super fun. It's super fun to pen test, though. I got to tell you that.
I've learned better since my PHP days, especially when it comes to overwriting variables. If I'm going to overwrite a variable, I'm going to look at some like array or map or something and change the variables myself, not just define new variables.
I think back. I mean, no shame at all. Back in the day, like PHP is sort of what like we used for the web. That was just
So when is? I was just going to ask. So when is this? Do you want to commit to a date when this calendar app is going to be totally working?
January 1st for sure.
All right.
I'm hoping to have it done before Christmas. I spent the last, I guess 4 days. I started development of the Santa tracker on the 9th. But to be fair, I also converted my ISS tracker to it, basically. So I already had like the world map and stuff done. The world map took me like a week and a half to make before, because I'm so limited on the amount of tiles that are available on the NES at one time. So I had to figure out how to reuse tiles a lot on that world map. I used Ireland 3 times. One is an island in the Philippines, one is an island off of the northern part of Canada, and one is Ireland.
That's
but-
amazing.
It's you got to reuse whatever you can. In fact, I don't have access. So the Santa Tracker prototype title screen does not say Santa Tracker because the letters LATLON for latitude, longitude, and the first 3 letters of every month, none of them include the letter K. And I didn't have many tiles to work with, so I just didn't include what I didn't have to, so I could use more of that space for the world map. So it is what did I call it actually? I actually had to look this up.
Santa Tracer, maybe?
Santa Tracer?
Santa Finder.
Santa
Finder.
Nice.
So, what? So, something else. So, I was watching you work on the Santa Tracker on your Twitch stream. What is your Twitch stream called?
It is twitch.tv/ViGrayTech, or I guess twitch.vigray.com also works.
Vigray Tech on Twitch. So, could we, if we want to follow along at home late at night while you're working on your calendar app over the next few weeks, will you be doing that on Twitch?
Probably, yeah. And I can't guarantee at night or at day. My sleep schedule is kind of an absolute mess these last few months, but I frequently will stream on Twitch whenever I'm just getting stuff done.
Do you just, yeah, my sleep schedule has also been a complete mess. So are you doing this on purpose? Is it like a polyphasic sleep, or are you just sort of going until you lie down?
It's just it's like that whole saying of if you bring a book to the bathroom with you, you have to finish the chapter before you leave the bathroom. It's essentially that, but I can't go to sleep until I finish that thing that I need to get done. So sometimes my day is 24 hours, sometimes it's 22 hours, sometimes it's like 40 hours.
So I've been considering like coding on Twitch, but not because I actually want anyone to watch me do it. Although I do think my swearing is probably fairly amusing if somebody else was watching me. But almost as a way of kind of setting a goal for myself, or like forcing myself to actually focus on something. So I'm just sort of wondering, like, do you find programming on Twitch to be helpful? Or
occasionally. So I have a few people that will occasionally watch my my Twitch streams, that specifically the non-technical individuals who just come in to hang out, basically. They tend to be the people that I usually will stream the most for, and then try to get stuff done. Otherwise, I figure in a lot of cases, as long as you don't have like incriminating data on your web browser and accidentally pop your web browser up while you're streaming, just if I'm programming anyways, may as well stream it. If 0 people show up, that's what I assume is going to happen. And occasionally someone does, so. Then occasionally you get, like, big names that'll pop in with a raid. Let's see, it would have been like a month and a half ago. Jonathan Blow, the creator of Witness, ended up raiding and gift subbing 100 gift subs, which threw me off. But especially considering I had known of the game The Witness before, but I didn't know the developer's name. I didn't know any of his other games. So I felt weird and a bit bad slightly that he just dropped in, gift subbed 100 gift subs, and then left immediately. But apparently that's a common-ish thing for him to do, according to people that came in from his stream.
Well, that means he found some project of yours on the internet and was like, that kid's cool. Like, let's go there. You know?
Yeah, and I've had a few people from his stream continue to watch my streams ever since. Those situations are kind of nice to have, even just not like caring about the money side of things, because Twitch will take a decent percentage of your subscriptions and stuff, assuming you get like affiliate and like partner and stuff like that. So the money is never really a big thing for most Twitch streamers. But yeah, just having someone occasionally pop in, find your projects cool, if they are interested in esoteric related stuff too. Now, if you have an issue that you need to talk through programming wise, they might actually know like a direction to point you.
Oh, I hadn't had that thought before. That's a good point.
Like a sort of rubber duck, but they're actual people.
And they can actually like point you in the correct direction if you can't figure it out yourself, which is also useful, unlike a rubber duck.
How often does the sort of like opposite end of that happen, where it's like people come in there and just like you're sort of on a flow, and they're like, "Oh no, you're doing that entirely wrong," because there's more opinions than people with coding and everything like that.
There's definitely that. I had specifically when I was so I was streaming the Advent of Code development stuff over the last few days, specifically the first week. I just stopped doing Advent of Code streaming because I'd get people who are also doing Advent of Code challenges. And a good enough percentage of them would end up saying things along the lines of, well, I figured the answer out the smart way, and your way is dumb. And especially when it's like a list of inputs that are 200 long, and they spent so much time doing things what they consider the smart way, rather than just getting the answer as quickly as possible or whatever, when they could have manually gone through a pen and paper and answered the question faster than doing it the too smart of way. I'm fine with them doing it whatever way they want to. If they challenge themselves in it, great. If they're just going to come in to tell someone that they're stupid for doing it in a way that's different than them and discourage people from coding, not good. And that unfortunately happens often enough when you have kind of the elitist people pop into programming channels.
Programmers optimize for different things, and this comes out in arguments I have with Rust developers. They're always like, Rust is better than Go, and I'm like, yeah, but with Go, I'm done sooner, right? And then they're like, yes, but it's less elegant, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm done sooner. And then it just goes back and forth. Like, some people care about elegance, or they need it to be in the end super optimal, and for me, I just have like a million projects going, and I just need them to be done as quickly as possible so I can move on to the next thing. And people just have different needs.
I've seen some code golf answers that would get people hired, and I've seen some code golf answers, those same code golf answers, that for some jobs the employer would not touch them with a 10-foot pole. Because sometimes you need the code to be very optimized, and in most cases, you need the code to be readable. And it depends on the situation, whether you need it to work as fast as possible, or you need it to be readable so other people can maintain said code. Especially if they can't understand the comments, the code should speak for itself in those particular cases. But that's the thing about coding is like with different paradigms of coding, functional programming, object-oriented programming and stuff, things are very useful for very specific use cases, and in other use cases, other things might be useful.
So personally, like, the comments are a holy war too. People are like, oh, your code's not well documented. And I personally think, like, you should only ever have a comment if there's something that's not obvious from the code. Or if you need to include an apology to whoever's reading it. Like, I'm very sorry I did this, but, just roll with it. Like,
my bar for comments is always like the second, like, I'll just use intuition to either add them or not add them the first go around. But, basically the second sprint, like the next time I see the code, if I don't know what it does, then I add comments. Because I wrote it, and if I can't in 5 seconds know what I was doing, and I have to go read more new context, then guaranteed no one else in the last time I've touched this that's looked at it understands what the fuck I'm doing. So
that's a good rule.
Comments now.
It doesn't help when it comes to like a project that you start yourself, and then you're going to have a different context of what, like, the layout of everything's going to look like visually in your brain, compared to someone that looks at the code from the outside. They're not going to know where to start looking if they want to contribute to the code. So comments tend to help especially if you're the one that started the project and you want other people to help as well. Basically point them and like, if you want to do this thing, look at this file.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good rule though, because it's like if you don't look at something for 3 months, when you look at it again, you don't remember anything about it anyway. You know, so it's like, but the other thing is like, I will always include a comment if there's like a line of code where if you, it might be weird, but if you change any part of it, something will break somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, so I'll have a warning like this line is magic. Like if you touch this line, be aware. Like a bunch of other crap's gonna break.
That's what I mean when I say like using intuition to when you should do it the first time around, right? I mean, because like Ben and I have worked on a fair amount of code together, and like there's definitely some times where like we hit a snag. And whoever figured out how to solve it had to go look up 5 things and ask 12 people. And it's like, I don't assume that those 5 internet pages and those 12 people are going to be, it's like a star constellation. Like, I don't assume all of that is going to be in the same easily indexable place. Like the next time I have to look at this code. So I'm going to put a giant document that says, here's how I came to this crazy ass conclusion.
Basically, yeah. Oh my God! I realized we were talking about game developers you met, and you mentioned you met the guy that wrote E.T. for the Atari.
Oh,
and,
yeah. And
so
there
is
a short period of time to discuss with him hating deadlines on that particular processor.
But yeah. But it wasn't that the one where they buried all copies of it with a bulldozer in the desert?
Yeah, so they made too many copies of it. The thing about ET, people will act like ET cartridges are rare because many of them were buried in the ground. No, it was extremely common. It was a holiday selling game, and a lot of kids cried that Christmas. So the issue, though, is they thought that, the next year or two we're going to have more people buy this game. No, they made too many copies too early. They couldn't do anything with it, so they just buried the copies. Which, I mean, the chips were already soldered onto the boards. It was potentially too destructive to reuse those boards and desolder everything. Those chips were useless now because they've already been programmed. And there were EEPROMs rather than EEPROMs, so you couldn't change any of that.
There might have even been mask ROMs at that point.
And people have gone looking for the exact spot where they buried this too, but I don't think anyone's actually found it. But it's like the world's lamest treasure hunt.
I seem to remember a documentary about them finding it, or like at least
one of the spots
where they are, and like they found like one, but they know that there's more, but they didn't give them access to like keep digging or something. Like I have very distinct memories of seeing something like this.
There's some people that have, and there's like a certificate of authenticity with the buried copies, which go for quite a bit, but also it's only worth as much as people are willing to pay. And if no one's willing to buy your secondhand copy of a buried cartridge, you got stuck paying a bunch of money for a thing no one's gonna buy. If you want to keep it as a collector, cool, but a lot of these people thought it was an investment, and unfortunately a lot of people seemed to have overestimated just how much the general population is willing to pay for a very niche, like, not well-received game.
Well, it's like it always makes this list of like one of the worst video games in history or whatever. But honestly, like Superman for the Nintendo 64 is always going to have the top spot.
I attempted to play through that game, and it is horrible. And a person that had the world record on that at a Games Done Quick event convinced me to try it, and that was. I have not beaten that game casually. It is horrible.
What kind of person has the world record for beating Superman for the Nintendo 60? You met that person too?
Yes, but that's because Games Done Quick events, they all just kind of congregate to those events, so it's really easy to find them.
Video game
was that like yeah, exactly. Was that like a relatively normal person?
Yes, they have a lot of good records on a lot of strange games. A lot of niche games in particular. I think one of the games they were playing was one of the weird Shrek games.
I mean, that's definitely a meme right there.
I mean, at that point, are they really just, they're just record sniping, right? They're just trying to find titles and
I
just
guess
fill out their
technically,
belt,
yes. And a
right?
lot of these games tend to be horrible enough that no one wants to play casually. sometimes games that suck casually are fun speed games. But they have to have some weird, like, out-of-bounds strategy or something where the maneuvers of doing that is rewarding in and of itself, even if the game is crap.
I imagine Superman has a lot of bugs like that.
There's a lot of things where, like, you need to pick up a car at one point, and there is no button to pick up the car. You just have to fly into the car at a specific angle. It seems to be RNG-based and perfect angle-based. And if you don't grab the car, you're dead, and you have to do the entire ring section all over again for that area. So that's like 5 minutes wasted because you didn't hit the perfect angle at the perfect frame.
I fired that game up once, and at the start screen, basically, it just shows you like one red pixel, which is supposed to be you on a total void, and there's no explanation of how to like use the controls at all. And that's like the starting point.
There's also changeable resolutions in that game. So you can lower the resolution of the game to cut down lag, to the point where the screen is like 15% of the normal size. And it's just a gigantic black border around it. But the people who will try to competitively run the game, because there's apparently more than one person, will play at that smallest size because it cuts the most lag down.
That's
I
amazing.
found the documentary. It's called Atari Game Over, and they did find a few hundred copies like buried in a landfill.
Nice. All right. Well, so I think our final topic, also one of your other projects, work in progress, the NES operating system.
Oh,
you want to tell us about that?
So I had a friend who's been commissioning me to work on this project. He wanted this to basically be kind of like a multi-cart sort of thing, but released on the Famicom disk system. And he wanted something that looked like an operating system. Is it just something that kind of looks something like Windows 95 as the boot select screen? And then he also wanted the family basic keyboard like added as well. So it was a keyboard expansion for basic cartridge that was a peripheral for the Famicom. And I figured while I was working on that, I basically had to write a kernel anyways in order to get everything working, like control-wise. So I figured instead of something that looks like an operating system, what if we made it an operating system? Because the NES is still a computer. It doesn't have access to multiply or divide natively, but it's still a computer. So yeah, we've been working on getting a couple programs written for it, like a calendar thing, which I'll be implementing that in, well, the calendar that I'm making into the operating system, but also getting some people to make like Minesweeper, Solitaire, Mahjong, stuff like that for it. I'll be working on a Telnet client soon, and I also have access to I'll likely get access to a second type, but a Wi-Fi enabled NES cartridge.
Wow.
So
what? How do NES cartridge network?
Stick an ESP onto the cartridge, and then have a mapper figure out how to communicate to the ESP, and bam, you have a Wi-Fi enabled NES cartridge.
Holy crap! You're gonna do all this in 32K?
This will be a bit bigger than 32K, thankfully. But the actual operating system itself will be 16 kilobytes, and only 16 kilobytes.
So you can fit that on the sort of non-bank switched portion of memory?
Yep. And that includes the kernel and everything. So, tiny operating system. And that includes like memory management and everything. Technically speaking, there'll also be 8 kilobytes of like save RAM. I guess technically 16 kilobytes with 8 kilobytes bank switchable. So basically 8 kilobytes will be useful for any game that wants to use more RAM, and then the other 8 kilobytes is for like if they need to save something in particular, or the operating system needs to save something. But there's also the ability with the family basic keyboard. So on the keyboard itself, there's an audio in and an audio out jack. It's just 3.5 millimeter mono. And that was to be used with the Family Basic Recorder, which is just a cassette player. So you could do data cassettes. So
Wow.
we plan on adding support for that. So if people want to write text documents or load in programs like on the old Commodore 64 style, they could load in from cassette. It also means, because there's audio in and out, there's now input and output, which means we could turn the keyboard into a dial-up modem.
Wow.
So we could get internet access that way.
That's madness.
You can have
You could talk to your badge.
Yeah.
You can have
I plan-
Nintendo Bob support. Was it? Robbie, the
So
robot.
Rob, the robotic operating buddy. Yep.
You can have support for
I
that in the OS.
So weirdly enough, Rob doesn't connect to the NES.
Oh,
He has the ability to press the A and B button on the NES.
I remember that commercial with the robot, and it totally looks like it's connecting to the NES.
So the NES, the screen will flash to some photosensors on Rob's eyes, and then Rob will move in those sorts of ways. But then there are basically peripherals that will press A or B on the controller. Or if you have a friend or just yourself that feels like speedrunning the game, rather than waiting the 40 seconds for Rob to drop the gyroscope, the top, to hit a button, you could just press A or B, whatever the screen requires you to do. But it'll
someone needs to telnet out to a bulletin board using just the power pad at some point.
So about that. I am adding in power pad support. I've also done a chess sort of game that I call the Knight's Tour, which is based on the computer science problem, the Knight's Tour, where you set a knight on the board, and the goal is to using knight moves only to hit every single spot on the chessboard. I have power pad support for that, and that's going to be added to the operating system. It basically acts like a DDR pad, except for instead of it being a 3x3 grid, it's a 4x3 grid.
I'm sorry, DDR pads act like the power pad, not the other way around.
I guess so. But yeah, there's a lot of peripherals that'll be added into this. But yeah, I plan on submitting a talk proposal using SMTP over the NES to email out the talk proposal and then make the slideshow in the operating system itself as well.
So you're gonna have power pad point, or
that could actually work. Having a power pad connected and switching slides using the power pad could definitely work. In fact, it means that I can be hands-free, which is even better for a talk.
Yeah, it's synergy right there. That would be amazing. Oh man, Nintendo always had the greatest peripherals.
And a lot of those peripherals as well tend to be used for 2 games.
Yeah,
It tends to be an $80 peripheral.
But an $80 in 1980 or 1990 money, 1989 money. That.
Yeah, but if it's a game like Duck Hunt, you don't need Hogan's Alley, really.
That's true.
Yeah.
Duck Hunt was and plus it was Duck Hunt / Super Mario, and that came with the whole system too, didn't it? It was just
for
the
real.
upgrade it was the upgraded version.
There's
that was
also
the most
Super
worth it
Mario
for
Bros. Duck Hunt Track and Field.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
Which I think came with the power pad as well, potentially.
Was Track and Field what was supposed to be paired up with the power pad?
Track and Field, I believe, used the power pad, but I think you could also use the controller and just basically button mash A and B.
Yeah, that's what I did with.
That's what most people did because we were all fat kids.
Or I guess
I never
technically
had the
speaking,
power
a lot
pad.
of people would use an electric toothbrush for that.
Oh,
That apparently was consistent enough.
there's a lot of alternate uses for electric toothbrushes apparently. No, I meant door locks.
What I said.
We've been playing Res
All right.
too much. Should totally make a Rumble pack for the NES controller.
Oh.
That wouldn't be super difficult to do. Unfortunately, getting information from the controller back to the NES is hard, but sending information to the controller is not.
Huh. That's weird. You'd think that would be the other way.
So the basically you could send pulses through the latch pin and data pins, which can then be read, and then using that information, you could encode some sort of way to get the rumble pack to play well.
Super cool.
By the way, Vigre, like I just want to say, continue to spit in the eyes of the demo gods forever. Like just disregard them entirely and make the most Rube Goldberg-iest presentations you possibly can, because I feel like that sets a bar for everybody.
It really is amazing. It's totally like it's amazing to watch. It's like someone juggling flaming knives and then,
it's been kind of
adding in
strange.
depleted uranium or something.
It's been kind of strange, kind of explaining the fields that, like, the NES in particular, because, like, I wouldn't really consider myself too into the, like, there's a few overlaps for the NES thing. You got the hacker side of things, the demo scene sort of thing, and then the video game sort of thing. And I don't really fit entirely into any of those groups, so at any of those conferences, any of those style conferences, I feel really out of place because I'm too much of the other two and not enough of the first group. So I fit comfortably, I guess, in all three without fitting enough in any one in particular. But
It's great. That means you're a bridge.
Yeah, but you know what? Everybody loves Nintendo.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot more. I've been looking a lot more into doing Game Boy development because I feel like I have a good 2 years or so of people obsessively collecting Game Boy games. When I started the NES stuff, people were obsessively collecting NES stuff. And I've learned for a while that sort of game-related things for people to start selling or collecting and stuff tends to be new tech CEOs just started making a bunch of money. They haven't learned to save their money yet, so they're buying things they feel nostalgic for. And then that bloats a market that then becomes slightly more mainstream nostalgia factor. So like 8 years ago or so, it was pinball.
Yep.
And then Atari 2600, then NES. I don't know if it's going to skip the Super Nintendo and go straight to N64, because there is a lot of overlap between NES and Super Nintendo. Game Boy right now is hot and heavy. I feel like N64 and PlayStation 1 homebrews are going to be the big thing in like 3 years from now.
I mean, especially with all the source code leaks that Nintendo just had for that.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for them, but also confirmed what a lot of people were hoping for, that they keep really good archives.
Yeah, I keep waiting for like PSP to become a thing, because like I never had a Nintendo because I couldn't afford one, and like my parents wouldn't buy me one, and I never had anything except for like I used to play my neighbor's Game Boy because we used to like play RPGs and like borrow it for weeks at a time. But the only game system I ever had myself was an old PSP. That was like the one thing that I like got my parents to pay for half of, and the only way that I got it was my parents paid for half of it, and then it was kind of a long story, but I ended up acquiring it through like Anime Expo stuff. It was like we got a demo from like the Japan office like before that was the thing.
Oh, awesome.
And that ended up being a huge deal because it happened to be that when the PSP finally dropped in America, that it was like firmware locked, but for whatever reason, the very, very, very first iteration of the machine when it dropped in Japan, it wasn't locked, and it turned out they were hardware identical. It was just that the firmware that came on the Japanese one didn't have the bit set that said like check the signature. And so if you never set that bit, like basically if you never put it on the internet vanilla, you could, once people had reversed enough of it, you could patch it and then it would never set that bit again. And it was like it was like the iPhone story, right? Where like there were at one point in time there was enough iPhone Ode that the dudes that do it just hold on to a few, and then every time there's a new version, they like, you know.
I thought
That was like the one. That was the one weird type of assembly I ever learned because I'd never messed with MIPS before. And that's what that is.
wasn't
Yep.
the PSP that was basically just a PlayStation 1, just like it was the same hardware, just like made into a form factor that was like.
Yeah, the graphics were a little bit better, and it was full MIPS, and I don't know if that was the same as PlayStation.
Okay.
There might have been some porting stuff that happened there, but yeah, it was cool. There somewhere on the internet there's still an archive of like before any of the tools were built, like you had to use a hex editor to like mess with stuff, and that's how people were doing it because you could go download an update file, and the update file was basically just an image.
Oh, nice.
And so people were just banging on it with hex editors, and like there's an old post that like I don't know if it's still up anymore, but it was on like a Sony forum, and we ended up putting it on a Sony forum because at the time, me and my buddy that were messing with it, we tried to do it on Microsoft's forum because it was a Microsoft game. It was like they had bought the studio that made the game that shipped with it, and posting like, "Hey, look what we got it to do!" And there was a screenshot of like where the image that's on the little SD card or whatever had a tux icon because we had swapped out the PNG and figured out like, the signature didn't care. We were like, "Hey, look!" And like they kept deleting the message, but we didn't know why. And I guess we kept reposting it before they could send us an email saying like, "Fucking stop it."
Nice.
We're like, oh, okay, I guess we'll post on this other forum. Like we had no idea, like we didn't grasp like why they would care. We were like, oh, we're like starting the pirate scene like a day after this thing just hit the market. That's why they're pissed off. Fuck.
I've been disappointed when it comes to so I mean a lot of people in the hacker scene aren't necessarily that happy about DRM. I'm of the opinion that if it has DRM, at least be good at it. There's so many things with DRM that just a shitty lock, but it's now a legally protected lock because it's technically there. And I'm a fan of, if DRM is going to exist, at least have it advanced technology. Have that cat and mouse game. It's kind of like, in like a really screwed up way, the RIAA with DMCAs and stuff like that has greatly advanced audio recognition AI with YouTube and Twitch. Like, that pushed really fast and really hard because Content ID needs to exist if the RIAA isn't going to sue YouTube or Twitch for every single violation individually for someone streaming some music or uploading some music, which is now being like trillions of dollars of lawsuits.
You know, that's a super valid point. It's almost like if you could re-represent whatever problem you want to solve as a blocker that's keeping people from pirating games or music or preventing them from reaching porn, like that problem will be solved faster than almost any other category of problem.
And yeah, I'm just a fan of, if blocks are going to happen, if roadblocks are going to be placed, at least be an interesting new problem. Because at least then we get research papers and stuff written about it. Like with
we get things like Intel SGX,
which by the way advanced side channel attacks quite a bit. Yeah.
like I've always gotten annoyed specifically with the copy protection on DVDs. Well, it's a DSS. That's broken not because of some like underlying algorithm like discovery, but because they tried all the combinations and in 2 seconds they got the combination. Like, if you can brute force that, like
there was a fundamental break with DCSS, wasn't there? Like I thought there was,
but there still was enough of a brute force you had to get done that you get done in 2 seconds. Like.
It was one number. It was basically just a magic number, and once you had it, you had it. And then even then, like it, like I always had a lack of respect for that implementation because they built it on top of the same system that did region protection, which was always designed to be turn-offable. Because like the people that make media only want region protection until they don't, and like running a large anime con for years, like. God, I can't even tell you how many times the people would show up and like be
Won't
super
work on my computer.
crack a DVD player so we could play their Region 2 DVD so their premiere didn't break. Like they were like super into it. I'm like, yeah, okay.
I
Oh.
remembered specifically with different licensed DVD player software out there, where you could change the region like 3 times maximum in your lifetime. And that's it.
Yep. And then you just go and flip the bit and then do it all over again.
Actually, one of the other things was like I want to bring up was the Game Boy Redbox thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
You totally have to add in because you said you're going to have fax support for that. You got to add in or you could have fax support. Add in the Game Boy camera and be able to fax.
Oh,
with that.
What was the VR Boy or Virtual Boy? Remember that with the
Virtual Boy, man. I missed that.
with the red lights? Oh,
Yeah. That was like the 5 pre-5.
I'm happy there are capture cards available for the Virtual Boy now, so you can play it like with gray instead of red.
Nice.
Nice.
That said, you'd be looking at your computer and you wouldn't be seeing stereoscopic 3D, but they did a setup like that for SGDQ 2020.
Nice.
See, that's what somebody needs to do. Is somebody needs to RE enough Virtual Boy so you can play that shit on Oculus.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, is there an emulator for the Oculus, like, or the?
There's definitely emulators available, and it shouldn't be too hard to port it, considering like the Virtual Boy wasn't a powerhouse by any means.
Yeah, just put one buffer on or one on each eye, and bada boom, you're emulating it.
And I do know that there is like a homebrew scene for Virtual Boy games, which is a shame that like there aren't available cartridge shells for it. Like the NES you can get cartridge shells for, C64 you can kind of get some cartridge shells for, and then Atari 2600, good luck getting any shells for that if you make homebrew games.
But you
You're
can like
basically gonna
print
have
all
to
those
get
now, right?
You could 3D print them, but that's such a long process, especially if you want to sell like 100 of them.
The new manufacturer,
yeah, you can do like injection molding, but it's like 11 grand to get set up, and then it's like 2 cents a unit after that. But
yeah, there was recently some Famicom shells from Masamura. Well, they do like NES boards and stuff, but they made they put the money down for Famicom shells because getting those molds made is spendy as hell, and you better sell a lot of thousands of them if you want to make that money back.
Yeah. That's for the cartridge or the actual full on Famicom.
So that's for the cartridge shells.
Okay.
For a while, you could go on AliExpress and get some shells that are pretty low quality. In the back, as I mentioned earlier with the PDF sort of kerning issue, has that with horrible spelling, different fonts like every 2 or 3 letters. And you just stuck with that because it's molded onto the plastic.
Ooh.
It's not just flat.
How'd they do that? Just have it blank.
And I think it's because they just saw that something was in Japanese or something, wanted to translate it to English or something, and then decided, well, these words were on here, so we need these words on here. And it technically works. You could sandpaper them off and stick a sticker there instead, but then if the person takes the sticker off, you have this scratched up surface.
Yeah, and you got to sandpaper 100 cards, like.
Yeah. I've been trying to look specifically to see if anyone has... So, there are a few factories I know that have molds for the NES cartridge shells. And for the Santa Tracker, I'm trying to find a frosted white transparent cartridge shell. Because I feel like... Because I want to make a custom board with controllable LEDs from the NES.
Nice.
red and green.
And like red, green, possibly some blue in there, possibly some maybe white. But there could be a clear shell, and that's easy enough to get. But I feel like a frosted, slightly translucent white would diffuse the lights a lot better.
That'd be cool.
It would be cool.
there's on the bottom of the NES, there's an expansion port that has I think a 56 pin expansion port thing. The thickness of the board is a pain in the butt, though. I've been trying to search around to get something that can fit inside of that without some weird spring pins or something. It's 2.6 millimeters, which is a lot thicker than other PCBs, and it's not it's not twice the size of a thin board. So everything that technically might be able to fit is a super snug fit that's going to break some pins.
Did anything ever use that?
Not on. Wait, yes. In Minnesota, there was a modem specifically to connect to the Minnesota Lottery.
That's the only thing that ever used the expansion port on the Nintendo?
Officially on the Nintendo in all regions, Minnesota modem.
That's amazing.
Wow.
And that got shut down very quickly by the Attorney General because they basically mentioned this is a thing advertised to kids.
Yeah.
You're telling them to gamble.
Wow.
And I can't find any of those. I want to source one for the operating system.
For what?
Because it's a modem that's built. It's directly for that. Yeah. I wonder if you could find a patent for it. Maybe.
For what, a Capcom modem?
So this is an NES modem, so specifically released in Minnesota for the Minnesota Lottery.
Oh.
I want to say that there was a modem in Japan for the Famicom.
If you want the Japanese one,
yeah, that one's easier to get. And there's a Super Nintendo one as well, or I guess Super Famicom one, but
yeah, wasn't there a satellite modem for the Super Nintendo?
There's a satellite modem, and then there's some X Broad or something like that as well for the Super Famicom. There's an individual, Luigi Blood, who did one of the talks for Thug Crowd's Air Gap 2020 conference, who does Satellaview hacking, and so occasional homebrew stuff for it. Apparently there are some Satellaview games that were not saved onto the Satellaview because you could only store so many games before you had to clear them out to download the new ones. Mm-hmm. And if everyone did that, now all of a sudden no one has that game anymore, and then it's just gone. So there's probably a few games that are just gone. It's the Sega Channel also had that sort of system as well, and a few of those games seem to just be gone forever now.
Huh. It's so weird that you would feel somebody would have captured one of the games. It's this is, I worked on this for. I guess you don't get to keep company property. Companies go out of business.
Well, and then there's the whole factor of if they had a home unit and they had the ROM loaded, then they end up, it changes hands, someone passes away, they purge it, it's gone.
Yeah.
They might even just want to play other games rather than their own game because they're sick of their own game.
Right. Occam's razor.
So the Satellaview thing is basically having some save sort of RAM. And also, I believe that was also battery backed. So if that battery dies, bye-bye data.
That sucks.
Because that was before flash chips were readily available.
Right.
This board is an NES board that has flash chips on it. Which thankfully you can program with 5 volts, which means the NES and the Game Boy can provide enough power to program it. Nintendo had some Game Boy cartridges, which I don't believe used flash, but something similar-ish enough, where you could go to kiosks and program games, including I think both of the Oracle Zelda games and a couple other ones, onto the cartridge. I think you could program only one game onto it. A fun quirk when it comes to the flash chips, though, on these particular boards, if everything is addressable on the flash chip, pin-wise, or at least memory management-wise, you could use the NES or the Game Boy to reprogram the flash ROM. So, for instance, if someone inputs the Konami code, you can punish them for doing such a cliche code by wiping the ROM. And because there's enough stuff running in memory too, you could, like on the Game Boy in particular, you have video RAM, so you don't have to have that on the cartridge at the point when things are like clearing out. You just stick it to video RAM saying, loading, please wait. And then as you do that, you reprogram the ROM or you just remove the ROM. Reprogramming the ROM is, in my opinion, the slightly better way to do it. Only because then, if it's like a conference badge or something, you could tell the person what just happened onto the screen and to go to a specific desk with $20 and we'll program the game back for you.
It's like ransomware.
Yeah, that's totally. I was gonna say kneecapware. Yeah.
No, I mean, actually, what you're doing is you're backporting microtransactions to NES, and I couldn't be happier about that, frankly.
But a fun thing as well is because like the flash is reprogrammable voltage-wise from the console, you don't need battery-backed RAM. Which the Game Boy and the NES, in particular with the flash chips, I've been wanting to do. So another input for the NES is the battery for a save cartridge. So whether or not there's a battery connected, whether or not the battery is new, those are two user inputs. So you could initially flash a ROM with some bit flipped to, some flag set. Once the battery runs out or is replaced, when it starts up again, that bit is no longer set to 1. So you could tell if there isn't a battery, if the battery is changed because that bit is not set. And then when essentially also you'd have a flag set to figure out whether or not the battery was in previously. So during a reset or power off, power on or something, you can then check to see if the battery was replaced. So you could check if the battery is replaced, you could check if the battery exists, and you could check if it's the original, like, programming side of things.
And that's basically just two GPIO pins, right? That are going to the CPU or are going over the cartridge?
What?
Is that like 2 extra pins basically going over the cartridge interface?
So in this particular case, it is the battery's providing the power for the PRG RAM. Which I guess technically also you could attach like a real-time clock, which I want to do for a custom board for the operating system, because it would be nice to actually have the time be correct.
That'd be cool. Just start adding ISA ports on here.
It's like, if Gold, Silver, and Crystal can do that, so can an NES cartridge. Just stick a crystal on there and you're good. Yeah, so the battery is able to be used as a user input, which I wanted to make a board that essentially, or I guess a ROM, where it will be a normal game, until the battery is taken out or dies, and then is a pirated copy of Super Mario Bros. So it'll take like 12 years before they realize that I just gave them a pirated game.
That's pretty awesome.
Well, let's, our blood sugar is dropping. Does anyone have any final questions or comments? Dan?
No, I mean, I just can't wait to see all of the terrible black magic you're doing with IO to the console for this OS. It's going to be, I'm really looking forward to it.
It sounds amazing. This is just like, I really love to see people go, all the way down on things, and this is like, the Nintendo was such a kind of important part of my childhood, everyone my age for the most part. And there were certain aspects of it, like I don't think we really understood at the time, and having it kind of, fully explained now is still just incredibly gratifying.
I will
You know?
also mention I am still very ignorant on a lot of things about the NES. I know a lot of things about it, but that I know a lot of things about the things I know a lot about. And I am in the dark for a lot of other things for the NES. I'm still I had just recently, like about a month ago, learned how to properly handle changing things per frame. So before I had everything running every single frame. And then a bunch of like break statements, if statements sort of like compares and breaks and stuff to figure out what states things were in every single frame. I had only learned like 2 months ago that I didn't need to do that. So, and that's one of the first things people end up learning about the NES, and I've been doing this since 2017, I guess, technically. And I had just learned how to do something that's basic.
I mean,
This episode definitely makes me sad that we never got the HushCon Game Boy like fully out, because it would have been rad.
I've been in talks with a few people about, and no promises on anything, but I've been looking into making a Game Boy badge for some sort of conference at some point, where basically it would be announced that it's a Game Boy badge, and then you just tell the people, bring something that can play a Game Boy game. And that's all that would be required, rather than having a different badge type based on if it's like a human badge or like goon badge. And I'm only using like DEF CON badge types as an example because that's kind of the hierarchy that I actually know badge wise. Rather than having the badges be different based on what type of badge they have, it would be different based on whether they're playing it on a Game Boy Color, a Game Boy Advance, or a Super Game Boy. And the Game Boy Color also has some fun features on it because it has an infrared transceiver. So you can communicate with Furbies. You could do back and forth talk to a Furby. You can be a TV remote. You can get signals in from a TV remote.
Did any game ever actually end up using the IR port on there?
Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I used to trade items or give gifts to other
gift.
people.
Yeah.
What?
So you didn't actually need to use the link cable, or you did for battling, I guess.
You did for, I think, a few things, but for like little gifts and items and stuff, you just like, on the playground at recess, trade with each other.
You should work this Furby into your talk now. So you're like advancing slides on the power pad, and then the Furby's
I've been wanting to do, and this is a very, I guess, anecdotal sort of thing. No plans were actually handled, but one of my dreams would be to work with the group Hack for Satan on a satanically possessed Furby badge.
Nice.
With
Like
a
whole
seance mode where they communicate to each other over infrared.
Yes.
And all of the source code for the Furby was leaked during DEF CON 26, like during the middle of DEF CON 26. So if anyone could figure out an arbitrary code execution point using the infrared transceiver, you could potentially get a Furby to... You could definitely make Furbies fall asleep.
Yeah,
Yes.
possessed by the devil.
Well, there's like a
propagation.
whole
Yeah.
subculture of Furby hackers. Like that's like a whole thing, even before the source leaked, of people who like RE'd it enough to figure out how to glue the syllables together to like make demon possessed sounding noises and like influence it over time because it had the learning feature, so you could like people like had IR blasted stuff that would like teach it certain things in certain orders that would make it say messed up stuff like that. That's like a whole rabbit hole.
Well, the Furby actually has a built-in like Satan mode, which I discovered entirely by accident through negligence. So I actually bought a Furby thinking I was going to take it apart at some point. I put batteries in it. I put it on a shelf. I left it alone for like 3 years, never touched it. And then the batteries didn't die, and I picked it up one day, and it was like, and it's it was screamed angry, and it had the rage eyes, you know, and it was like full on Satan Furby. And I was like, that is a peculiar feature to include in a child's toy.
The thing I want
But-
to figure out in particular with Furbies is whether or not I could do arbitrary code execution on the Furby over the infrared port only to cause it to start making a sound and then go into an infinite loop. So it'll never stop making that sound until you take the batteries out, which requires the screwdriver.
Yeah.
If you could also have it be blasting the IR at the same IR, so just propagates at that point.
And then you could start a metal band with only Furbies on the vocals.
The satanically possessed Furby in particular, I wanted to cause Furbies to either fall asleep, start screaming forever, and then turn televisions on and off, volume up and down, and channels up and down.
Like TV be gone.
Little poltergeist in there.
I mean,
all the electronics go crazy. That'd be amazing.
I was going to take it in a much more innocent direction. You could end up having like a master slave setup where you could start creating Furby acapellas and just have like an entire sing along with whole sets of Furbies.
That reminds me of
one.
the Furby organ from is it Look Mom No Computer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one that went evil, was that the old one or the new one?
It was a newer one. It wasn't the first version. I mean, I still have it actually somewhere in here.
Well, because the new ones can do way more stuff than like the old ones. Like getting the old ones to do stuff was like a thing, but it was like one chip, and people just figured out how to do all kinds of craziness. But the new ones have like they're pretty advanced apparently.
The NSA apparently didn't allow Furbies on premises because for a little while they didn't know for certain whether or not it was recording things.
Nice.
Well, wouldn't it like record random chunks of audio and then play it back?
The regular Furbies, no. I don't know about the newer ones, but the regular ones basically just have a sort of kind of happiness/learning meter. The more you interact with it, that number gets higher, and then the higher that number gets, the more English it starts speaking.
Yeah, and like which English it starts speaking is, I guess, based on like a table with a bunch of simulated syllables, and there's only like 12 of them or something like that. But that's how you would get the like weird demon noises, right? It was like combination between like low battery, and because of its number setting, it would only do like and over and over again. So you'd get this like.
The beautiful thing about Furbies as well is you can leave a Furby just in sleep mode for a decade. And then you wake it up, and it'll have just enough juice to wake up and to start making a sound, but not enough juice to continue any sort of other operation. So if you accidentally bump the Furby after 12 years, you need to find a screwdriver, or you just smash it with a hammer, because it's going to be an annoying mess until you open up the battery compartment.
So like it just starts leaking acid out of the batteries.
Today's helpful hacker tip.
Yeah. I'm a little concerned that I've admitted to this like history of Furby abuse. Oh well, I'm a bad Furby owner. And on that cheery note, I want to thank our guest Vigray or Vigray Tech, as it is.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you so much. This has been a really gratifying learning experience about all things NES cartridge, and I'm really looking forward to your operating system and your calendar app. Go ahead.
Oh, the memory knob and bank switching on that just seems like it's going to be insane. Definitely, I'm going to follow up on that.
Yeah, well, that'll be a custom cartridge, right?
And will be releasing likely to some degree on Famicom Disk System.
Nice. So are you going to be like selling that for money?
Yes.
Good. I will buy one. At least one. So is there, do you have a site up for that you'd like to plug?
I mean, I have my regular website, vigray.com. So Gray spelled with an E, and then Vi like the text editor, such as vigrey.com.
Awesome. So we'll keep an eye on that for whenever that becomes available. Awesome. Thanks to Vigray. Also thanks to our usual panel, Mitchell, Virus, Max, and Dan.
Thanks for having me.
And now more than ever, hacking is not just a crime.
It's a
survival
survival
trait.
trait.